But was doing something, so I'm waiting.
That's it.
I need to make her co-host. Yes. Yes. We can start. So, welcome everyone, online and at the center. We are gathered here today to listen to Venerable Lekden. Venerable Lekden is our beloved teacher, and I'm so happy to be welcoming him again to our center. All of us know him. All of us have really benefited from his teachings and from his deep knowledge of the Dharma. He has come today from the monastery at Seraje, where he is studying for his Geshe degree for the past 12 years. He has been ordained by His Holiness, and he is from America. Today he teaches us about, his teaching is on Bodhisattva, which is an 8th century text written by Shantideva, which helps us understand how our self-cherishing mind is the source of all our pitfalls. It guides us to cultivate the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections, and to encourages us to develop the attitude of cherishing others, and hence proceed along the path to enlightenment, where we can and also benefit all sentient beings. So with that very clumsy introduction, Venerable, we are waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhvi. Welcome, everyone, online and here in person. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. As usual, let's take a moment to settle ourselves into our place. Whatever worldly activity we've been doing throughout the day, whatever back and forth we've been doing, worrying about breakfast, worrying about tea, all these things, we can put those worldly activities to the side and allow ourselves to focus, allow ourselves to be fully present in this space, create for ourselves a sacred space in which we will engage the teachings of the Buddha and learn how to implement them in our lives. And in that way, we will set a strong motivation. The reason we've come together today to study the teachings of the Buddha is not simply to improve our own lives, but so we might learn the techniques and the wisdom and the skill necessary to be a benefit to others. So as we find more peace and happiness and contentment in our own lives, that allows us the greater capacity to be of service to others. And so our ultimate goal is to be of service to others. And to that end, we are working to attain Buddhahood for ourselves so that we might be a benefit to others. So set that strong motivation that I'm not here for my own benefit alone, but so that I might be of service to others. And with that, we will offer some preliminary prayers. So in the gold prayer book in front of you, on page 34, we'll begin. We'll start with Refuge and Bodhicitta, which we'll offer 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue. Sangye cheran soki chonam lae chancho pardo dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi jola pinche sangye dru par sho sangye cheran soki chonam lae chancho pardo dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi jola pinche sangye dru par sho Sangye chedan soki chonam la chancho bardo dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola penche sangye dro parsho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. We'll offer short mandala offering, both to request the teachings from your side, also to request all the blessings of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. We'll offer once in Tibetan and then once in English. Joishing me tok tram ri ling shi ni de gem di Sangye shi du mi te u ai dro ku namanda shi chi par sho. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Gurana Mandala Kamniyatayami. We'll continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is on page 73. And so what I'd like to do with our preliminary prayers, with every activity, Dharma activity that we do, we should be trying to combine method and wisdom, right? So bodhicitta or compassion and the wisdom that tries to understand the nature of reality. So generally, it's very common to recite some prayers, refuge and bodhicitta, like we started with, and other prayers leaning towards the method side, and then some prayers for wisdom. So after the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is an offering of refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, as well as a celebration of the Buddha's good qualities, and then ultimately a condensed understanding of the teachings of the Buddha, that's all contained in this prayer. Then we'll also offer the Heart Sutra, which is representing the wisdom of the Buddha and the understanding of the nature of reality. So we'll offer those two prayers now. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, sublime community, to you I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of fault, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the ways of aging, sickness, and death. We'll continue with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration in the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom, to look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, no origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. While the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed, Tagyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised what has been spoken by the Bhagavan. We'll continue with the prayer to eliminate obstacles. the prayer to the lion-faced Dakini. I prostrate to the gathering of Dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamartha Shadu Samaraya Humpe Akasamartha. Akasamartha Shadu. Akasamartha Shadu. Akasamartha Shadu Samarayam Pe. Om Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Soha. By the teaching of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Okay, great. We'll end there today. Thank you. It's good to try to balance all of our practices with a bodhicitta motivation, but also the wisdom of emptiness, right? We need to balance these two accumulations. They go hand in hand, and they both are necessary to lead us towards Buddhahood. So, whatever activity we're engaging in, it's good to try to balance those two. So today, it's almost Losar, which is the Tibetan New Year. So I want to talk just a little bit about Losar and about Tibetan holidays in general, what's going on, So Losar is coming up on Wednesday, which is the 18th. And they generally happen sometime in the middle of February. It's, the Tibetan calendar is a lunar calendar, so it changes. Now, Losar is actually not one of the holidays in the Tibetan religious calendar. In the Tibetan religious calendar, there are 4 holidays. The first is the Day of Miracles, and that happens the 15th of the first month, so in about 2 weeks. The second is, we call Sakadawa Duchen, so on the 15th of the 4th Tibetan month, that's a commemoration of the Buddha's birth and his birth and his death, passing into nirvana, right? And then there is Wheel Turning Day, which is commemoration of Sakata Duchen is also commemoration of his achieving enlightenment, all on the 15th of the 4th month. That's the way the Tibetans understand. And then the Wheel Turning Day is the 4th day of the 6th month, and that is celebration or anniversary of the Buddha's first teaching, his first sermon. And then on the 22nd of the 9th month is Labab Duchen, when the Buddha descended from the heaven realms where he was teaching his mother back to our realm to continue teaching here. So those are the 4 main religious holidays. There are also cultural holidays that are included, such as Losar is one, so the first of the new year. We celebrate the anniversary of Tsongkhapa's, showing the aspect of passing away, so that's Tsongkhapa Day, or Ganen Namkyo. And then at Seraj, for instance, we celebrate the anniversary of Gyalten passing away. He composed many of the textbooks at Seraj. Losar itself, Lama Yeshe passed away on Losar, so we celebrate Losar as well as the death anniversary of Lama Yeshe. So there are cultural holidays mixed in as well, with those 4 main religious holidays. And all of those, we consider them merit multiplying days. And this can be a little, far out and hard to believe if you don't already kind of buy into the Buddhist system. But the idea is that any merit you accumulate on those days is multiplied. And the way I think about it is those days throughout the world and throughout all 3 worlds, so many sentient beings are practicing at the same time. They're engaging in fervent prayers, fervent meditation. They're accumulating merit in such a forceful way. There's something about engaging in that practice simultaneous with so many other sentient beings that it magnifies the merit we accumulate. That's the way I like to think about it. Okay. But our teachers are very clear that these, especially Khyamche Lama Zopa Rinpoche, that the power of these days is really important. So if you have an opportunity to practice on a merit multiplying day, you shouldn't waste that opportunity, right? Even if you fully believe in the calculus, the merit calculus or not, it's a very powerful day to practice. And so we're celebrating Losar as well as the Day of Miracles here. On Losar, I'm not able to return because I'll be at Sarah, but there'll be recitations in the morning or in the afternoon. I'm not quite sure. Those are online. And then in the evening, there'll be Guru Puja as well. So we are doing celebrations here. But Losar is really the first of the days of miracles. So the first of the 4 holidays is the Days of Miracles, which happens on the 15th of the first month. And what that celebrates is there was one time where the Buddha was staying near Rajagriha, where King Bimbisara was staying. And King Bimbisara was a devotee of Shakyamuni Buddha, who is there, and Buddha was there with with his whole entourage, right? Many thousands of people following him. And King Bimbisara's brother, his younger brother, didn't follow Shakyamuni Buddha. He followed 6 Tirthikas, or we say heretical teachers, or non-Buddhist teachers. And King Bimbisara tried to convince him, you should listen to a teaching of the Buddha, and you should follow Shakyamuni Buddha, because his teachings are profound, they lead to liberation. And his younger brother didn't have any interest. He said, I already have a teacher. I don't have to follow some other teachers. But he had respect for his brother, for the king, and he said, okay, and he held a giant feast where he invited his teachers, but he also invited Shakyamuni Buddha and all of the Buddha's entourage to attend this giant feast. He said, out of respect for my brother, who is the king, who follows you, I invite you and your entourage to this feast. But of course, he set up a high throne, and right away his teachers took the high throne, as is appropriate. And when the Buddha and his entourage arrived, there was only the lower seats available. And as the Buddha moved towards those lower seats, the 6 teachers, the heretical teachers, they got up from the high seats out of their control and moved down to the lower seats. And you could see they were fighting it. They didn't want to, but out of their control, they got up and they moved and took those lower seats. 3 times they kept trying to take the higher seat, and 3 times they kept, without their control of their bodies, moved to the lower seat. So then the Buddha took the high seat. And then when the food was served, before it was served, they came with a water pitcher for everyone to wash their hands. And they went to the Buddha and he said, no, first offer to your teachers. And so they went to wash the hands of the teachers. And as they turned the pitcher over, no water would come out. No matter how much they tipped it, the water stayed in place. So then they went to the Buddha and they offered him water first. And once he washed his hands, then the water flowed and they were able to wash the hands of the others. And then the food was served and he asked for a blessing for the food. And the Buddha said, of course, you should ask your teachers. Your teachers should offer the blessing. And they tried to offer a blessing and they just started choking. There's nothing but spit and choke coming from their mouth. They couldn't say any words. So finally, they requested the Buddha to make the blessing. And he was able to speak a very beautiful blessing and everyone was moved. And then when they went to eat the food, and the same thing, they went to offer food to the Buddha and he said, no, your teachers are here. You should offer to your teachers first. And they tried. And every time they tried to grab the food, it would fly off the plate. They couldn't actually pick up any of the food. So finally, they indicated and they offered food to Shakyamuni Buddha. And once he was offered food, then they were able to receive the food. And finally, at the conclusion of the feast, they requested a teaching. And of course, Shakyamuni Buddha said, your teachers are here. You should request teaching from your teachers. And they did. And the 6 heretical teachers tried to give a teaching. But again, they couldn't say anything. Finally, they indicated with their hands that Shakyamuni Buddha should teach. So he gave a teaching that inspired the minds of everyone there, and everyone achieved realizations. Except for these 6 teachers who were very angry. They became very angry. And so they went to town, and they summoned demons who possessed them. And they started causing a whole ruckus and saying how the Buddha was a charlatan, and everything he did was fake, and spreading these really pernicious rumors about the Buddha and the teachings he gave. And they said, we'll prove that we're more powerful than you. We challenge you to show your miraculous abilities. That you have not only do you have sweet words, that you actually have some sort of realization. You should be able to perform miracles. And so they went to the king and they said, we challenge the Buddha. We expect him to come meet us and have this proof that he actually has realizations by performing miracles. And the king laughed and he said, that's a mistake. You shouldn't do that. You don't know what you're saying. And they said, we do it anyway. We're powerful teachers. And he said, okay. And he went to the Buddha and he said, you've been challenged by these heretical teachers to perform miracles. And the Buddha said, when there's an appropriate time and appropriate place, then set the throne and we'll do. So they set up a throne thinking, okay, then we'll have tomorrow this performance, right? But then the next day, the Buddha got up and he left, and his whole entourage followed him. And he went from Rajagriha to the neighboring town of Kausambi, right? And so the heretical teachers followed him, and they said, he's running away, And they went to the king of that area, who was King Ujjayana. And the same thing, they said, we challenge Shakyamuni Buddha or Gautama to show that he has miraculous power. So please set up a throne so we can have this, he can prove his ability. And again, the Buddha said, when there's an appropriate time, we'll do this display. But again, the next day he left. And so like that, he traveled through, I think, 7 or 8 different areas. And he met with the kings or the local people of each of those areas. And always, he said, when there's an appropriate time, then we'll have this display. And finally, the last location was Shravasti. So he was at Shravasti, where King Prasenjit was there. And finally, he said, okay, set up a throne. Now it's an appropriate time. Now, as you can imagine, as he was traveling all these places, every time the entourage that followed him got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So by the time he got to Shravasti, he had a large, very large audience, to say tens and tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands even, of just humans, never mind non-humans. So they set up a lion throne for the Buddha, and then 6 thrones for the heretical teachers. And on that first day, so that is celebrating the first day of miracles, the Buddha took the piece of wood he was using to clean his teeth, and he just put it in the ground. And then a tree emerged that was many kilometers tall, and its branches spread out in many kilometers, and its branches were filled with fruit and jewels. And as the breeze blew through the branches, you could hear the Dharma being taught miraculously through this breeze. And then the Buddha gave a sermon, he gave a teaching, and he helped inspire many, many minds, and many people achieved realizations. And like that, he did similar. Every day, a different king would come to him and request him to perform a miracle. So in the first day, it was King Bimbisara. And then in the next day, it was a different king. And it was either a king or the group of people from a different location. So in that way, he was requested every single day to perform different miracles. And, the miracles on the second day, he looked to his left and to his right, and 2 giant mountains emerged out of nowhere, and beautiful streams of nectar flowed down the mountains. And from the bubbling of the water, you could hear the Dharma. And again, he used that as an opportunity to inspire people's minds and give a teaching on the Dharma. So like this, he performed all these miraculous deeds. Every day, a different miraculous deed. Then on the 8th day, Indra and Brahma came to him to make the requests. And they said, please, will you offer example of your miraculous powers? And on that day, what he did was he went into meditative realization, and then 5 demons emerged from nowhere, and they destroyed the thrones of the Tirtika leaders. And then Vajrapani emerged, and Vajrapani was holding, so Vajrapani is the Buddha of power, yeah? I don't know if we have an image of him here. And his Vajra that he was holding was sprouting flame, and they called this the miracle of Vajrapani's fire. And the Tirtikas were terrified, and they ran and jumped in a lake, and died in a lake, which is a little bit of an abrupt ending to their part of the story. But they were so terrified, they went and jumped in this lake and died. And they had 90,000 followers there who were so overwhelmed that they immediately turned to Shakyamuni Buddha, and they said, we want to be your disciples. And they immediately all became fully ordained monks. And they all had, long matted locks and beards, which were the sign of being a Tirtika student. And immediately those were automatically disappeared, and they became perfectly shaven like a Buddhist monk and became devotees of the Buddha. And then he gave, again, a sermon, and he inspired many minds. Now, I will say, if I had the miraculous ability to shave like that every day, that'd be nice. That would save me a lot of time if I could just, snap my fingers. So at that point, on the 8th day, there were no longer Tirtikas challenging him, right? Yet he still kept getting requests from different teachers, different kings rather, and different peoples to perform miracles. So he kept performing miracles for 15 full days. And that's when the 15th was the final day. And on the 15th, King Prasenjit came to him and again requested him to perform a miracle. And on that day, he said, please bring me all of the empty store containers for all of the food that you store in the kingdom. And they brought all the empty containers, and they were miraculously filled with food of 100 different tastes, enough to feed all the infinite people that were visiting there at that place. And then, as a means of giving a Dharma teaching, he said, why is there such misery in the world? After showing this miraculous thing of the infinite capacity for food and nourishment, he said, why is there such misery in the world? And right away, the whole audience knew their experience of misery in the world exists because of the ripening of negative karma from negative actions we've done in the past. And so they immediately developed a conviction that they must practice the virtuous activities and abandon non-virtuous activities. And so that's what we're celebrating in the day of miracles on the 15th, and through all 15 of those days. We're celebrating that performance of miraculous deeds. Yes?
I think it's a very well established fact that somebody who realized a certain stage can perform miracles in maybe Buddhism or the how does that work?
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a second. Yeah. So before we get to that, the mechanics of performing miracles, I think for me, from that story, what's important are a few things. You know, the first is that at that original feast, when the Buddha kept saying you should ask your teachers first, he wasn't being arrogant, right? He wasn't trying to show off or make the other teachers look small. He was being genuine. He said, "You have your teachers here, and the Buddha has the Buddha can't be offended, right? His equanimity towards all sentient beings is infinite. So the Buddha doesn't feel disrespect. He said, your teachers are here, you should ask them." So he wasn't using any miraculous powers. He wasn't showing off his arrogance. He was being genuine. But due to his presence there, the other teachers didn't have the power to give the blessings or to eat the food or do those things. It wasn't some magical power from the Buddha. It wasn't the Buddha trying to make them look small. It was just due to his power of being there, right? And, in a worldly example, I'm sure I know I've been around people where I had a game plan of what I wanted to say or what I wanted to do, but I was so overwhelmed by their charisma that all of my plans went out the window and I had to just listen to whatever they were saying, right? So we can tell that sometimes people have a presence that is so overwhelming that all of our thoughts are out of our control. And so he wasn't showing off arrogance at that feast. He was merely being present and being respectful. He was being genuine. But due to his divine presence and how powerful it is, that is why the Tirthakas
So the blockage came from
their side.
From their side.
Yeah. He wasn't doing anything from his side to block it. It came from their side. Yeah. Because they had such, they were so haughty and full of themselves. And they had this idea that we know what's going on and he's nothing. He doesn't mean anything. And so they had such minds of disrespect that their attempts to engage in any activity were blocked. Like it was a active manifestation of blocking their haughtiness. They obviously felt ashamed and embarrassed, right? Because they were trying to show off that they're in charge and they couldn't do the things they're supposed to do, right? And made them feel bad. But it had nothing to do with the Buddha. It had to do with their own ripening karma right then because of their attitudes of, we'd say, hampa chumpo, like their arrogance and their haughtiness, right? So it wasn't from the Buddha side. It was just from their side, like an immediate ripening of their karma, They were trying to show off and it blew up in their face kind of thing. So that's the first thing to remember, is the Buddha wasn't being arrogant. The Buddha was saying, this is your space. You invited me here. I'm going to follow your suggestion. These are your teachers. I'm happy to sit on the lowest seat. The Buddha, has no need to sit on a high throne. The Buddha sits on a high throne because it benefits students, not because it benefits the Buddha. Same with any of the teachers. Teachers sit on a throne not to benefit us, but to benefit the students, right? As a way to show respect for the Dharma that we're trying to share. That's the reason that the Buddha sits on a throne, or the teachers sit on a throne, right? And then the reason the Buddha didn't immediately respond was, when you give a teaching, just like when you engage in any activity, Dharma activity or spiritual, you have to recognize that it has to have the right time and the right place and the right audience. So the reason the Buddha didn't immediately give in to this challenge was because it wasn't the right time, place, or audience. But by traveling through all these different regions and accumulating a larger audience and finally ending at Shravasti, that was the right time and right place and the right audience for him to perform these miraculous deeds. So he wasn't putting it off. He was recognizing that if I want to be of the maximum benefit, it has to be the right circumstances. So when we go about engaging in our practice, we need to do the best we can to cultivate the best circumstances to make our practice as strong as possible. Now, we don't always have those choices or that ability, right? Sometimes we're left with what we're left with, so we do the best we can. But we should always work to cultivate the best circumstances possible. And it's the same when giving instruction or receiving instruction. There are things I could give teaching on now that wouldn't be of any benefit to the students that are here. So as someone giving instruction, you have to be aware of what is the right advice I can give at this moment. And that goes for worldly advice too. When you're advising your friends or your family, you might know that what they really need to hear is X, Y, Z. But if I say that now, they're not going to listen to it. So first I have to do something else to prepare the way so that when they hear the right advice, they'll be able to receive it in a meaningful way. So that's what the Buddha was doing at that time. So we have to recognize that whenever we give advice or receive advice, it's necessary for the right time and the right place and the right audience, okay? And then finally, the most important part is his performance of miracles was only to inspire faith in the audience, right? And After he had inspired faith, then he gave a Dharma teaching. And that was what was most important, is him teaching the Dharma. The miracles were just a way to captivate the audience and help inspire them. But the real important part of that experience was then he gave a teaching afterward. And His Holiness Dalai Lama has said similar things where he's given the Kala Chakra initiation a number of times. And usually before the Kala Chakra initiation, he'll give about 10 days worth of teaching, right? And now the Kala Chakra initiation, he says it's very important for world peace. That's always why it's a big production. There's many tens of thousands of people that attended. But he said, the last one I attended, actually every time I've attended one of the ones that he's given, he said, for me, the 10 days of preparatory teachings are what is most important. I give the Kala Chakra initiation to get people here. And that's the attractive part. People want the initiation. They're very excited about initiations. So I give a Kala Chakra initiation. Many, many people come. Look, in Bodh Gaya in 2011 or 12, there's 350,000 people, right? Many people come for Kala Chakra initiation. But for me, more important is the 10 days of teachings that I give before that, okay? So it's the same thing the Buddha was doing here, or the same idea, that you give something big and shiny to attract everyone. And then once you've attracted them, then you use that opportunity to say, now I have your attention, let me give you an important teaching. So the Buddha performed these miracles, not because he had any reason to compete with these Tirthikas, right? He had no reason to compete with them. They could insult him all they wanted. It didn't affect him, right? It didn't affect the Dharma he was teaching. But he realized that he could use it as an opportunity to inspire people, to wow people, and then to teach them the Dharma. And that's the reason he did. Now, as far as the ability to perform miracles, we say that as you are able to really subdue your mind, you're able to recognize every single element or cell in your body and control them, which is why they say, when you have a realization of emptiness, for instance, you no longer, solid objects no longer a problem. You can walk through walls because you're able to control every atom of your body to such an extent that the appearance of solidity is, you don't hold on to it as truly existing, and you're able to perceive a way through it. There's the famous story of Dignaga, right? Who milks a painting in order to gather milk, because he was supposed to go milk the cows and he didn't. So instead, he was criticized for being lazy, and he said, "Look, you need milk for the monastery," and he milked the painting to get all the milk that all the monks needed for their daily tea, right? So it's a matter of, we say you can tame your mind to such an extent that you no longer are bound by our perception of reality. But the important part of all of those, we call them the cities, right? There's the common cities and the uncommon city. Uncommon city is Buddhahood. City being a accomplishment, a realization. The importance for all of those cities are only to help inspire faith in others. To be able to perform any miraculous ability, such as flying, they say, that's one of them, being able to see infinitely long distances, that's only so you can benefit others. The action, the miraculous ability on its own is meaningless. It's a parlor trick, right? It has no benefit except to inspire others. And then once they're inspired, then you can give them a teaching, or you can share the Dharma with them in a meaningful way.
So, Venerable, why aren't they used then more effectively, like the great masters who are around today?
Contemporary.
Yeah, they know, I'm sure they know that if they perform some such miracle with social media and the internet and everything, it's going to go all over the world, really, and it's going to attract people. And so why isn't it?
I don't know. I think these days, that the contemporary world is not a space for miracles like that. Realistically, think if there was a teacher that showed he could fly, what would happen? He would be captured by the government, and he would be dissected and studied. And then there'd be as many people that were inspired by him. There'd be people that said it's all fake, and they would do nothing but insults. I don't know. I think that the environment now is not the kind of environment that really supports that. Maybe. And, I've seen teachers engage in activities that seem miraculous, but they do it in small groups. They're not going to do these large miracles. If they benefited, they would, But it's the same reason that His Holiness Dalai Lama has the form of a human body right now. Even though he's Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, he could take the form of 1,000 arms and 11 heads, but he doesn't, right? Because A, we don't have the karma to see that form, but B, oh, here we go, right here. If a being looked like that showed up, right, and tried to give teachings, maybe some of us would be very moved because we're so accustomed to that, right? Most people would be terrified to see a being with 1,000 arms, right? So it's what is appropriate for the time and place. And so maybe this is not a time of miracles right now. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, anyway,
It's easy to fake it with computer magic anyway. So maybe I don't know, you know? Again, the teachers do what's best for the audience, right? So if there's a time and place now where a miracle would be beneficial, then they'll do miracles. Sometimes big miracles, sometimes small miracles. Only if they're benefiting. Because again, they're not benefiting this life, right? So if a Buddha could heal you of your sickness, right? If he could perform that miracle, that's only benefiting you in one life. So he's not going to do that unless it actually moves you to the Dharma and benefits you in infinite lifetimes. Just simply healing your sickness in one life, we feel like our whole world is centered on this one life, so we think it's the most important thing ever. But in the big picture, it's a very small thing, right? So that kind of miraculous deed wouldn't be beneficial if it was only helping you in a small way. So traditionally, to celebrate Losar, you know, traditionally, Tibetans would visit the temple. They make offerings to the temple. They make offerings to their guru. And then they visit family and friends like this, you know. That's a very common way to celebrate Losar. It's kind of a holiday celebration like that. There's also a big day for light offerings. So there'll be a lot of light offerings that are done on Losar and through all of the 15 days of miracles. It's very common to do light offerings. So those are the most common ways to celebrate. The other cultural thing, which is purely cultural, is 2 days before Losar, on the 29th. They celebrate the 29th with what is called gutuk. So you know tukpa. Tukpa is Tibetan soup, right? So gutuk, gu means 9. So tukpa on the 29th, traditionally what you would do is instead of making, so tukpa, you know, I don't know if you've had tukpa, but it's like noodle, like flat noodles made of flour. They take it and then roll it into balls. And in the ball, sometimes they put like a piece of wood or a chili pepper or a big chunk of salt. And there are a number of different traditional things. And then you'd serve this tukpa to everyone. And then you'd take out your ball and you'd open it up to see. And that would be like a fortune for what your year was going to be. You know, so if you got the chunk of salt, then it meant such and such. And if you got a chili pepper, it meant that such and such. So it was like a little bit of like fortune telling like this, you know. And it's not really based in Buddhist teachings, but it's Tibetan cultural practice. And even at my house, we generally do. And the boys love it, you know. And these days we don't put things in the dough balls, but they just write it on a piece of paper and put those papers in the dough balls. And then you all get together, you have to pull out your dough ball and you read it. And then no matter what it is, at least, you know, my teacher, no matter who gets whatever thing, it's the most hilarious thing ever. He's like, oh, you got the chili pepper. Oh, you got this. And it's just a very, you know, it's a very cultural way to explore and like celebrate what's going to happen for you for the new year, you know. But then what they traditionally do also is they make an effigy out of straw and hay, and they bring it to the roof of the house and they light it on fire. And they bring it through every room of the house. They bring it outside. And they use that to burn away all the negativity of the past year and to try to start fresh. So again, this isn't a religious practice per se, but it's cultural practice. Recognizing that we have an opportunity now, let's start fresh. Let's look at the new year as a way that we can be productive. We can focus on Dharma. We can focus on benefiting others. And all of the afflictions that have worried us throughout the whole year, we can burn them away by creating this effigy. And we can leave them outside the courtyard. And instead we can focus on what we can move forward, right? So it's a way to really prepare yourself for the new year. So those are the cultural practices and religious practices we do. And then we should also say that Tsongkhapa instituted, you know, Je Tsongkhapa performed 4 great deeds, it said, right? And the first great deed, well, he performed many great deeds, but like there are the quote unquote 4 great deeds of Tsongkhapa. And the first one was in 1402, where he restored the statue of Maitreya at the Zinji temple. So that was the first great deed. And then that was in 1400, excuse me. And then in 1402, he gave extensive teachings in the Vinaya, also at Zinji. Months and months of teachings on the monastic discipline. And it really restored the idea of monastic discipline among the Sangha. So that's the second great deed. The third great deed is he created what's called the Great Prayer Festival, or the Monam Chenmo. So during the days of miracles, so the first 15 days of the new year, he created it in Lhasa, this huge prayer festival where every day there are extensive prayers offered. And not only that, there's debate done every day, right? So traditionally, it's not just offering prayers. At the Monam Chenmo, the Great Prayer Festival, debate is done every single day, you know? And generally the Rampa Geshes are the ones that are answering debate, is how it was traditionally. I know we already received a schedule that says your class has to debate such and such a day at the monastery, right? And like the number 1 and number 2 of your class are responsible for creating a debate. So it's not just prayers, it's prayers and debate. It's showing how you need to combine both. And so that's the third great deed of Tsongkhapa, is instituting this great prayer festival that took up the first 15 days of Lhasa in recognition of the Buddha both performing miracles and then giving teachings. He instituted this Monlam Chemo, or he created the Monlam Chemo. The last great deed of Tsongkhapa was in 1410 when he founded Gyalten Monastery. So those are the four great deeds. The third one is Monlam Chemo. So the big way we celebrate these days of miracles at Sera is, for instance, on Losar, there will be a puja first. Generally, there'll be a puja first at Seralachi. So Seralachi is the combined for Serajay and Saramay, right? So that'll usually be at 4 a.m. There'll be a puja at Seralachi, because then at 5 a.m. there'll be a puja at Serajay. And then at 6 a.m. there'll be a puja at your own kanzen, which are the individual house groups, right? And then you might have your own puja at your own individual house where you live, maybe, maybe not. So that's in the morning. But then the rest of the day is kind of a holiday, you know? And then throughout Monlam Chemo, there's prayers at Seralachi every day and debate every day until the 15th, when there's, again, many, many big pujas in the 15th. So that's how they celebrate at the monastery, by doing extensive every single day. It is more relaxed, though. You know, it is still kind of, the monks are technically on holiday. Like, we're not studying anything. We don't have debate in the evening. So the debate is more friendly and like very enjoyable, very fun like this. But our days are filled with prayer and debate. So I think for us, you know, obviously we aren't Tibetan, and the Tibetan calendar doesn't mean a whole lot to our everyday life, but it's an opportunity, to recognize that this can be a chance to renew our practice. This can be a chance to look at all of what we've done the last year, celebrate all of the ways our practice has flourished, all the things we've done well, and then look at the things that we still need to improve upon and say, okay, you know, I didn't have perfect practice, but these are the things that held me back. These are the obstacles. These are the way I hope to overcome them in the next year. So we can renew our practice. And so that is the celebration of Losar and the Days of Miracles. Just a little bit of a clue of where we're going, right? Again, when you are visiting others, you do it without arrogance. And when you're giving advice or seeking out advice, right time, right place, and right audience are all important. Those are the most important messages for me. Any performance of miraculous deed is only a precursor to giving Dharma teaching. The important part is Dharma teaching. Mm-hmm. So for us, as we are studying Bodhisattva's way of life, or the Bodhicharya Vitara, which is demonstrating what it means to live life like a Bodhisattva, I think the most important thing we take away is that every one of our actions needs to be infused with compassion. Everything. It's the most important. Now, the truth is, compassion is revolutionary, you know? And that sounds like a very easy like catchphrase, right? But I generally mean it. If we think about how often we go through life, not just us, but any sentient being, where we're not motivated by compassion, but motivated by taking care of our own self, right? The self-cherishing mind, or the mind that wishes to harm others. That is overwhelming. Most of our activities are blinded by one of the three poisons, you know, and compassion has nothing to do with it. And even when we do good deeds, those good deeds are often just because we want to be recognized for those good deeds, you know? If we actually allow ourselves to have compassion, the wish for others to be free from suffering and all the causes of suffering, as the primary motivating factor for everything we do, it really revolutionizes the way we engage in the world. And a big reason for that is, by focusing on others, we stop looking at ourselves, right? We don't create the space for the woe is me attitude, for the self-cherishing attitude, because we're constantly focused on prioritizing others' needs. And that prioritization, you know, looking at others as more important than ourselves, doesn't give us the space to have an ego that is constantly grasping at me and mine. So we use compassion as a way to help deflect our grasping mind at saying, I'm more important than everyone. And once we're no longer the center of the story we're telling about the world, then our mind is much more content, right? When we don't focus on me and my happiness all the time, when I'm focusing on your happiness instead, then when someone insults me, or when I experience obstacles, whether they're obstacles from other sentient beings or just obstacles to the environment, I don't take it personally because I'm not upset by it. Because I'm not the most important person in the story. I'm not the main character. I'm an ancillary character. Okay? So by relocating ourselves from the center and using compassion as the center, then not only are we actively working to help others, but whatever we experience, it doesn't make us as distressed. We have less opportunity for emotional distress because we've stopped focusing on ourselves and our happiness as the most important thing in the world. Compassion and bodhicitta, so bodhicitta being the extension of compassion, the wish to become a Buddha to benefit others, or the intention to become a Buddha to benefit others, that when we're actively cultivating those minds, we can't simultaneously have a mind that says my happiness is more important than yours. They can't exist at the same time. So by getting rid of the self-cherishing mind, we find much more contentment, more joy, more stability in our lives. That doesn't mean we avoid the external obstacles. Those are still going to ripen. And we've already created negative karma. If we don't ripen that, if we don't purify that negative karma, it will ripen in some way in this life, maybe with physical illness, maybe with all these different circumstances. But our minds will become distressed by that because we won't be focusing on our own happiness as the most important thing in our lives. So compassion really is revolutionary because we spent our whole life focusing on ourselves, not on others. So when you turn that upside down, what does it mean to be revolutionary? That's what it means. To look at everything through an entirely different lens. And in the same way, kindness is a type of strength that we can cultivate. When you have a mind that is seeking out others' benefit and is only seeking to be kind to others, that doesn't make you weak, right? It makes you stronger because you are empowered not for your own benefit, but for others. You're not allowing whatever comes your way to serve as an obstacle. Any insult, any criticism, any illness, any of these things don't become obstacles to you. So when you are cultivating kindness to use as the way you engage with others as the primary means of engagement, that's a strength you have, right? It's like a superpower. And I think it's something we need now more than ever, right? As we look at the world around us and everything's in flames, having kindness as a strength is important. And now many of the people that are causing harm in the world, they think kindness is a weakness. They think that being kind, being compassionate, caring for others shows that you're weak, that you're going to get trampled on, that you're not going to succeed in life. And that mindset, there's such a paucity, such a poverty of thought in that mindset, right? You can see what their priorities are. And you can see their priorities aren't actually about happiness. Their priorities are about worldly happiness, worldly gain, temporary benefit. And those priorities grab onto temporary happiness as if it were real happiness. So we can look at that and see that that's not helping them or anyone around us, or around them rather. So we should look at our own acts of compassion and kindness as our strength. Now, it doesn't mean we act in a naive way, right? As I said, we have to have wisdom and compassion both. All of our actions in the world, we have to use what conventional wisdom we have to make sure we're engaging in intelligent actions and not just putting our bodies in danger for no reason, right? Or engaging in actions that will come back to hurt us if we don't have the emotional or mental capacity to navigate it in a complete way. So we have to balance wisdom and compassion and not be foolish, not be naive, but we should always approach others with compassion and concern as our starting point, even if there are people trying to hurt us. Compassion and concern for their well-being. And then from there, we use our wisdom to see what's the best thing I can do in this circumstance. What's the right teaching for this circumstance? What's the right action for this environment? Right? We have to use the example the Buddha gave. That says everything is there's a time and place for everything. What is it? How can I implement my compassion now as opposed to other activities? So, question is, what comes first, compassion towards self or compassion towards others? We need both. So the way the Mahayana teaches it is that everything we do should be motivated by compassion for others and bodhicitta. So even when we're sitting in the Lamrim and we're studying the practices and meditations that are common with the lower scopes, those should still be infused with the mindset that I'm doing this to benefit others. So compassion, and that just in our everyday practice, we should lead with compassion. But the idea is, how can I really cultivate compassion for others, the wish for them to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, if I don't have compassion for myself? That's a very common way of asking. It's a very common thought. And these days in contemporary psychology, that self-compassion is a big thing people talk about, and compassion fatigue is a big thing that's talked about in contemporary psychology. for caregivers especially.
Compassion for who?
Compassion fatigue is
Fatigue.
a noticed thing where people that are in caregiving roles aren't taking care of themselves, and then they end up burning out, right? I agree that compassion for self is important, but for me, you have to ask, what does self-compassion look like? So if compassion is the wish to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, then we say, my wish to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. What's another word for that?
Wisdom.
Not quite.
Enlightenment.
No. The wish. That's the result. But what's the wish that I don't have suffering? Means I don't want to be in samsara anymore. What's the wish to be free from samsara?
Renunciation.
Renunciation. There we go. Right? Renunciation. So that I don't want to be in samsara anymore. I want to be free from samsara, achieve nirvana. Right? I want to not be caught in this web or blown about by the winds of karma and delusion over and over and over again. That is renunciation. I renounce worldly pleasure because I recognize that worldly pleasure, worldly benefit is meaningless in the face of something bigger. So that's renunciation, the wish to be free from suffering. That is what self-compassion is. Developing a mind that wishes to be free from suffering is self-compassion. Right? So if we think of self-compassion as giving in to my whims, as saying like, I'm going to go out and party, or I'm going to go to the spa, or I'm going to go do shopping therapy, or all these worldly things that we talk about as self-compassion, that's not self-compassion. That's just giving into our seeking out worldly pleasure. That's giving into our self-cherishing mind, right? So I agree, self-compassion, renunciation is critical. And if we don't think that we should be free from suffering, then it's hard to develop that wish for others, right? Which is why when we study the teachings and we study the Lamrim, first we study the suffering of the lower realms, right? To realize what kind of suffering there is there. And that develops a fear in us that we don't want to experience that suffering ourselves. So we do, in the process of studying Lamrim, we study renunciation before we study compassion, right? For that very reason, we have to understand what suffering looks like in the lower realms and then suffering in the upper realms as well. So we look at all the different types of suffering that exist in samsara, how samsara itself has the very nature of dissatisfaction. And once we understand that, we develop the wish for us to be free from that suffering, develop renunciation. And then based on that, we develop compassion for others. So in terms of actually increasing our compassion, yes, self-compassion does need to come first. But in our everyday life, we need to try to practice all of them at the same time, right? Which is hard because we're beginners, right? But we should try, even if our compassion is words only, we should do our best to make compassion be our motivating factor. The idea that I'll worry about compassion later, first I have to focus on me, right? That's missing the point. Or even if you say, the compassion and bodhisattva are too hard, it's so hard to be reborn as a human, I'm just going to do lower scope practices to ensure that I have a perfect human rebirth in the future, and I can practice Mahayana practices in the future when I have that. That's missing the point, right? We have to do all of them at the same time, but recognize they're fulfilling different roles in our spiritual journey, in our spiritual practice. And we know that, my compassion is like a paltry baby thing. It's barely more than words, but at least I'm putting effort into it. And the more effort I put into it, the more natural it becomes. The more I meditate on it, the easier it is for me to have compassion as my first instinct, as opposed to something I have to think about, right? So my compassion now, as feeble as it is far better than my compassion was 2 decades ago when I first started studying Dharma, right? And hopefully in a couple of decades in the future, it'll be stronger still. So it's constantly improving. And while I'm trying to increase my compassion, I do the other practices, like renunciation, like recognizing karma, like doing all these things. And they work together, The Lamrim organizes them into a sequence because we see how they build on each other. But the truth is, they're intertwined. All of the practices of the Dharma help all other practices. So the idea that we're only focusing on one thing to the exclusion of other things is not how it works, Not in my experience. Okay, with that, I know we want to take a break today. We still have some time. Anyone that's attended my Sunday teachings, I don't like taking a break in the middle. I try to save it to the end, especially because it's very difficult for people that are joining us online to take a break, a tea break in the middle. But we are celebrating birthday today. And so I was asked to take a break. So I'll try to take a break, but we still have a little bit of time. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to at least introduce this next section of verses from where we stopped last time. And I think there's about 7 or 8 verses that all go together. So I'd like us to recite all of those verses together, and then we'll talk about them all as a unit, as opposed to going verse by verse. We've been going for quite a few weeks, and sometimes we go quite slow. think it'd be nice to do like a group of verses today because they all, if you look at the most common commentary, they all go together. I will say before I do that, I should introduce what we're actually talking about. So the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, like we said, is a text by Shantideva, who was a teacher at Nalanda. He has two famous texts, right? And this is one of them that he spoke and he offered. Now, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, it is teaching what it means to live the life of a bodhisattva. So we can look at it as really three main parts. The first section, which is the first three chapters, is how to develop bodhicitta, right? The second section, which is the next three chapters, 4, 5, and 6, is how to protect that bodhicitta. So once you've developed bodhicitta, how to protect it, make sure it doesn't decline. And then the third section, 7, 8, and 9, is how to then increase that bodhicitta once you've developed it. And then the last chapter is a chapter on dedication, right? So we can look at it in these three big sections: how to develop bodhicitta, how to protect bodhicitta, and how to increase our bodhicitta. So in the first section, chapters 1, 2, and 3, the first section is an introduction to the idea of bodhicitta. And then chapters 2 and 3 are how to practice the 7-limb prayer as a way to fully engage in a mind of bodhicitta. So, and included in the 7-limb prayer is the practice of generosity. So of the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas, the first one is included in that 7-limb prayer. That's the practice of generosity. That's the first section. The chapters 4, 5, and 6 are how to protect bodhicitta. So verses 4 and 5 combine to talk about the perfection of morality or ethical discipline. And then the 6th chapter is how to practice patience, the paramita of patience. Okay. And then 7, 8, and 9 are joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. And that's how to increase your bodhicitta. So we're on chapter 4 right now. So like I said, chapters 4 and chapter 5 go together to teach what it means, how to perfect the practice of morality. So chapter 4 is on conscientiousness, which is being aware of your surroundings, basically, not engaging in a mindless way, right? Bakyu in Tibetan. And then chapter 5, that's chapter 4. Chapter 5 is on alertness or sheishin, on awareness, right? That you actually are perceiving, you have a subtle mind active all the time to see when you are distracted, whether you're experiencing inner distractions or outer distractions. So conscientiousness and awareness work together to help, or alertness, they sometimes say, to prevent us from engaging in harmful deeds. And specifically in this case, to prevent us from allowing our bodhicitta to diminish, right? So it's useful to look at the outline of the text before we begin. And so we know that this chapter, chapter 4 on conscientiousness, the reason we're studying conscientiousness is that conscientiousness and alertness combine to explore the importance of morality, to teach morality, and that itself is taught as a way to help protect our bodhicitta from declining. So once we have that context, it gives more meaning to the actual verses we're studying as well. So I always try to remind myself, what is the larger context or, the section of the text that this is being taught, and why is it being taught there? Because generally we say the practice of morality, there's 3 types of morality that are taught as when you're studying the perfections. And one is the morality of restraining from non-virtuous activities. One is the morality of performing virtuous activities. And one is the morality of working to benefit others, right? So those are all different types of what we call morality or ethical discipline, sotram in Tibetan, shila in Sanskrit. And so the most common way we think about morality, though, is to how to avoid negative actions, right? Like that's the instinctual meaning of morality. And so here, how can developing a mind of conscientiousness, especially attuned to our cultivation and practice and maintenance of bodhicitta, how does that lead towards not engaging in virtue and engaging in virtue? Not engaging in non-virtue and only engaging in virtue. So that's an important thing to think about as we continue. Okay. So with that, we'll turn to chapter 4. And last week we finished on verse 12. So in this book, that's on page 27. What I'd like to do is for us to read verses 12 through 20 together. That's one section. Okay. And so then after we read verses 12 through 20, we can talk about them together. What times? Okay. Therefore, just as I have promised, I shall respectfully accord my actions if from now accord my actions. If from now on I make no effort, I shall descend to lower and lower states. Although for the benefit of every creature, countless Buddhas have passed by, I was not an object of their care because of my own mistakes. And if I continue to act like this, again and again I shall undergo suffering in unhappy realms, sickness, bondage, laceration, and the shedding of blood. If the arising of the Tathagata, faith, the attainment of a human body, and my being fit to cultivate virtue are scarce, when will they be one again? Although today I am healthy, well-nourished, and unafflicted, life is momentary and deceptive. The body is like an object on loan before a minute. With behavior such as this, I shall not win a human body again. And if this human form is not attained, there will be solely wrongdoing and no virtue. If, when I have the chance to live a wholesome life, my actions are not wholesome, then what shall I be able to do when confused by the misery of the lower realms? And if I commit no wholesome deeds there, but readily amass much wrongdoing, then for 100 million eons I shall not even hear the words happy life. For these very reasons, the Buddha has said that, as difficult as it is for a turtle to insert its neck into the yoke adrift upon the vast ocean, it is much more difficult to attain the human state. So these verses, what preceded them, right, is reminding us why not only we should cultivate bodhicitta, but ensure that we don't neglect our own bodhicitta, and we don't prevent others from engaging in virtuous deeds, right? So the verses right before this are also talking about how if we serve as an obstacle for a bodhisattva performing a virtuous deed, then that's a great negativity from us, right? The example they give is, if the whole world was, if you robbed every single sentient being and then killed them, the negative karma you'd accumulate from that is less than the negative karma you'd get from preventing a bodhisattva from offering food and drink to an animal, right? And we don't know who's bodhisattvas, which is reminding us that we should never prevent others from engaging in virtue, right? So that was the verses that led to this. So now, on verse 12, we say, just as I have promised to help all sentient beings. I have developed the mind of bodhicitta, or have promised to try to cultivate it. Just as I have promised to lead all sentient beings into the state of Buddhahood, then I will accord my actions with that goal. If I've made that promise, that everything I do will be for the benefit of others, then everything I do should be for the benefit of others. Not just while I'm meditating, not just while I'm doing service work. Everything I do should accord with my bodhicitta ideal. Now we know that I can't speak for you, but I don't have actual bodhicitta, right? I'm doing my best to cultivate it. I have a fabricated bodhicitta that isn't very strong. When I'm meditating on it, I have some feeling of it, but it's not something that is instinctual yet. It still takes effort for me to actually cultivate that mind, right? Yet it's worth the effort. Even if it isn't real bodhicitta, I've done my best to accumulate bodhicitta, and it's stronger every day with my practice. So even though we say, well, I haven't achieved bodhicitta yet, therefore I don't have to worry about it. No, we may not have achieved bodhicitta yet, but we're trying to. In the same way that we're trying to make compassion our primary motivating factor. And now that I've made that promise that I will make sure my actions and my life is dedicated to benefiting others, then if I don't do that, then surely I will descend to the lower realms, right? I'll be breaking my promise to all sentient beings in some way. We don't have a literal promise to all sentient beings, but a metaphorical promise to all sentient beings. And so then continuing with verse 12 we did discuss last week. But if we continue with verse 13, although for the benefit of every creature, countless Buddhas have passed by, I was not an object of their care because of my own mistakes. Now, what this is saying, this translation is a little bit wonky. What it really could say is, instead of saying I was not an object of their care, we should say I did not become an object of their care. The difference is the Buddhas have equal and infinite compassion and benefit for others. They're always trying to help us, right? But due to my own actions and my own mind, I wasn't receptive to their help. In the same way that if you don't go to the hospital, a doctor can't help you, right? Or if a doctor prescribes medicine, but you refuse to take it, the doctor is helping you equally, but you aren't allowing the conditions to be such that you're receiving their help. So in the past, due to my own negative actions, my own confused mind, although there were countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas trying to help me, I did not afford a receptive mindset that I could receive their benefit. I could receive their help, right? And so it isn't that we were ignored by the Buddhas, or the Buddhas are saying, oh, you're too much of a jerk, I'm not going to help you, It wasn't like that. The Buddhas were trying to help us, but we weren't listening. We were avoiding them, and not on purpose, but by practicing non-virtue, by seeking out minds that only are harming others and not helping ourselves. We did not allow ourselves to receive the blessings and teachings of the Buddhas.
So in a way, we are like those heretical teachers.
Yeah, in many ways, exactly.
Minds are blocked.
Exactly. Our minds were blocked due to whatever strong negative afflictions that were present at that time in our past lives. And so because of that, that's reminding us. Well, that goes into the next verse, but the next couple of verses. But first off, what I think is important about that is, personally, I like to be reminded that I constantly have Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that are trying to benefit me, right? That no matter how alone I feel, no matter how difficult I feel, there are other sentient beings, and there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well, who are working for my own benefit. I'm not alone. I feel alone because my own self-cherishing mind is focusing on my temporary circumstance and saying this is all that matters, right? So my loneliness is coming from my own mind, allowing myself to fall into this pit of like woe and unhappiness. And if I can remember, I'm not alone. There are other beings that are working for my benefit, even if I can't perceive them, then that helps lift my spirits. In the same way, in a worldly way, if you're working on something very difficult and other people, like your family members, are supporting you, even if they can't actually help you, but you have their support, that makes it easier for you to go through whatever you're going through, right? And so as long as I can remind myself, no matter how alone I feel, there are Buddhas that are working for me. And in the past, I didn't have that awareness, but I do have that now. Because I've been introduced to the Dharma, I've been able to work on my mind. I've been able to recognize my own negative afflicted minds when they're arising. I'm working to become a Buddha myself. So I have the opportunity to hear the teachings of the Buddha, realize their benefit, and work towards incorporating them into everything I do in my life. So I'm not alone. So for me, that's inspiring. And it helps me stay motivated when practices get difficult, right? Now you notice in the rest of these verses, what we're talking about is the practices that are common with the lower scope, with the scope of the small scope sentient being, whose goal is only to have a positive rebirth, right? The idea of organizing the Buddhist teachings into a sequence wasn't something Atisha invented, right? With his Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And then Tsongkhapa read in Lamrim Chemo as a commentary to it. He wasn't the first one to do that. The uncommon thing Atisha did was recognize that these practices are shared with the small scope motivation, which is to say, to have a beneficial rebirth. This next group of practices, the medium scope motivation, which is to be free from samsara for oneself. And this final group of practices is to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And so he identified the practices and labeled them as to one of these three categories, but actually organizing them to say, first, you have to recognize the importance of having a perfect human rebirth, and then you have to realize how precious it is and that you could die at any moment and meditate on death and impermanence. Many, many teachers advocated, they realized that's the important part at the beginning of our journey because that motivates us to practice Dharma. So here, Shantideva, who existed a few hundred years before Atisha, we see him saying, in order for us to make sure our bodhicitta is strong, in order for us to make sure our bodhicitta doesn't decline, what do? We meditate on perfect human rebirth. We meditate on death and impermanence, right? So death and impermanence supports our practice of bodhicitta. It prevents our meditation on death and impermanence, rather, and meditation on perfect human rebirth supports our practice of bodhicitta, prevents our bodhicitta from declining. So in these next verses, it is him reflecting on perfect human rebirth and on death and death and impermanence as well. So first, with verse 14, he says, if I continue to act like this, so if I continue to allow my bodhicitta to degenerate, if I continue to cherish myself as more important than others, right? If I continue only to engage in benefiting myself alone, then, of course, I will just be reborn in lower realms again and again. Now, this verse is actually a response to a qualm, like an imaginary interlocutor who says, right now, I haven't become an object of concern for the Buddhas due to my actions. But it's undoubted that sometime in the future, I will be. So why should I bother exerting effort now if I know that in the future, I'm going to eventually have an environment and a mind that allows me to become an object of the Buddha's care. So why should I bother exerting effort? Because it's going to happen eventually. That is the nameless interlocutor suggests that. And so the response is, look, if you keep acting only for yourself alone, you're definitely going to experience being reborn in the lower realms. And we can look at the experience of the lower realms and realize their suffering is so overwhelming that the idea that they could then motivate themselves to practice Dharma is silly. You know what I mean? It's not impossible in the animal realm. Nagas can practice Dharma. They're like the one type of animal that supposedly have the ability to. No other animal can. And definitely not hungry ghosts or hell beings, right? Because their suffering is so great that even the word of Dharma doesn't exist to them. And so, yes, it's true that in the big infinite timeline, eventually, every single sentient being is going to become a Buddha. But that's because you have to exert effort. Now, the thing about this text in general is many of the verses like this are responding to these hypothetical interlocutors. And in this chapter, it flows pretty easily. You don't have, even if you don't know who those interlocutors are, the verses still make sense. Last week we had verse 7, though, that was a little bit confusing if you didn't know what he was responding to. But in general, it makes sense. However, or the not counting dedication, chapter 9 on wisdom, there are so many interlocutors that come from different tenet systems that can be very confusing to read chapter 9 on your own without knowing the unspoken people that he's debating with, right? So this text is really moving. It's useful to read it with a commentary, you know? And there are contemporary commentaries from contemporary masters like His Holiness Dalai Lama and other teachers from all 4 lineages of Tibetan Buddhism have given commentaries, and you can find different copies of them. The most common commentary we use is by Gyalten. There's also one by Togme Zampo, because it's good to know what they're responding to. Like, what is this verse actually? Where does this response come from? So here he's responding to someone saying, there's no point in exerting effort now, because in the future, I'll come under the care of a Buddha, even if I'm not under their care now. So why should I exert effort? And the answer is because if you don't exert effort, you're definitely going to be reborn in a lower realm. And for countless eons, you're only going to experience the suffering of a lower realm, such as sickness, bondage, laceration, and experiencing cutting and these things, shedding of blood. And again, for me, I need to remind, why is this pointing me towards conscientiousness? Why is this verse reminding me that if I'm not engaging in virtue now, I'll be reborn in a hell realm? How is that teaching me to be conscientious of my actions? And how is that conscientiousness leading me towards practice morality? So again, with verses like this, I have to remember these things. And so we'll go through the next 2 verses briefly before our break. The next 2 verses are the introduction to perfect human rebirth and death and impermanence, right? So first is perfect human rebirth. And he says, if the arising of the Tathagata and faith and the atonement of the human body and my being fit to actually cultivate virtue are so scarce, then what is the chance they'll ever be born again? Right? So when we talk about the perfect human rebirth with its 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, which we can talk about more after the break, it's so uncommon to be born as a human. And I have all of those things now, right? Not just as a human, but a human with access to the Dharma, with a motivation to Dharma, without inherent wrong views, with the circumstances that allow me to practice, right? It's so rare. Look at how many sentient beings don't practice Dharma or don't have the means to. It's so incredibly uncommon. What's the chance that I'm going to get this again? Often in texts like Foundation for All Good Qualities and many other texts, they refer to it as this precious human birth that's found only once and not again. And that is an exaggeration, right? We find it more than, but we say it that way to prove how rare it is. It's like finding it only once. It's the likelihood. It's having found this human rebirth and not using it to its full potential. They say is like traveling through a tsunami of an ocean to get to an island that's made of jewels, and we go through this terrible storm and we're battered by the waves, and we have to face these fierce beasts from the ocean and go through all this trouble to get to this island filled with jewels, and then we just turn around and come back empty-handed. We don't take anything with us. We go through all the suffering but don't get anything as a result. That's what it's like to have gone through so much effort to cultivate a perfect human rebirth, but then not use it to help others and to actually practice virtue. Is like the most foolish thing we can do, right? And that's especially important in this chapter, because what is the primary cause for being reborn as a human with a perfect human rebirth? Is what? Kind of. What is this verse teaching us? Not this verse, excuse me, not this verse, this chapter. Morality, right? It's conscientiousness in the helping us towards morality. So having pure morality is one of the primary causes to be reborn as a perfect human with a perfect human rebirth, right? For me, that's all. When I think of perfect human rebirth, it's it's the first of the things we study in the Lamrim, and it seems like you can just jump over. You're like, yeah, okay. I have all these resources, I have all these privileges, I have all these things. But then I think, how hard is it for me to keep pure morality now? Like there are so many obstacles I have to keeping pure morality in this life. And yet I must have done it so diligently in past lives. Otherwise, I wouldn't have these resources now. So it motivates me when I look at how difficult it is to practice morality. I mean, some morality is quite easy, like the 5 precepts in general are quite easy. Not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, especially about spiritual attainments, quite easy, not consuming intoxicants, relatively easy, right? But that's not all there is for morality. Morality is abandoning all non-virtuous action and adopting virtuous action. Those are both aspects of morality. You have to do both, not just abandon, but abandon and adopt. And it's so easy not to do. Our instinct as worldly beings who are focused on our self-cherishing is not to practice morality all the time. Not killing, sure, that's easy. We use that as the example. We talk about not killing because it's the first of the 10 non-virtues and because it's easy to use it as an example because it's so clear. But that's also really easy. Do you know what I mean? Like abandoning non-killing is relatively easy. However, I say that not killing humans is relatively easy. How many people eat meat, right? How many people are willing to participate in this economy of violence that is about eating animals? Or even this morning at my hotel room, there was a whole group of ants that came out of nowhere. They're just walking around, And very difficult to avoid killing insects like that, especially if you own a home and you have an infestation of insects or other vermin in your home. It's very hard to avoid killing in some circumstances. Killing humans, that's easy to avoid, hopefully for most of us. But, samsara is difficult and there are many opportunities for killing. So when I think of how difficult it is to practice morality now in a perfect way, then I realize that it's only through practicing perfect virtue, perfect morality, that I have the chance to be born with a perfect human rebirth. That just makes my appreciation for this perfect human rebirth now even more powerful, right? Because I realized how hard it was to earn this opportunity.
But even though we might have practiced perfect morality in some life,
this is not plugged in, and it's going to turn off.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, sorry. If we may have practiced morality in some life,
even though we've done that, it clearly hasn't left any deep imprint in our.
Well, it's ripened as us having a perfect human rebirth.
Right, but
Right.
the tendency to not, like, it hasn't led to a strong tendency.
It's different with different people, right? So, like, some people depend, so first off, you're correct that not everyone who has a perfect human rebirth has the tendency to continue to guard their morality, right? Because their practice of morality in the past has ripened. The primary ripening result was their perfect human rebirth. And for some of us, we also have the result of having a tendency towards morality, but that isn't inherent in there's different types of results that can come from different actions. So it would be nice if it was that way, but that's not the case, unfortunately. The primary ripened result is perfect human rebirth. Yeah.
When next rebirth apart because we might not have, the faith or per se, we don't think that big. We're quite I'm very narrow-minded in this life, right? So I also like to think from perspective how morality can help us in this life itself. Any views on that?
Yeah, well, as I was saying in the beginning, where I think having compassion is a revolutionary mindset and having kindness is the strongest position we can have when engaging with difficult circumstances. It's the same with morality, right? That all of these virtuous qualities, practicing, we guard morality because it prevents our minds from being overwhelmed with despair and delusion and harm, right? So never mind that I'm setting up for a positive rebirth in the future. More, it's just that if I have a mind that is pervaded with the wish to cause harm to others, and a mind that isn't working on protecting my own ability to engage in virtue, then I'm always going to be following that negative tendency. So I won't be able to work for my own benefit or others' benefit, right? Because it's always going to have self-cherishing as the center of its activities. But even then, you can just see also in a worldly sense, the better you treat others in general, the easier your life is, right? Like you can look at the worldly examples, which don't pervade 100% of the time. We know times that we've acted very kind and very selfless and been given, a boatload of anger in response. Like that happens, right? Due to whatever karma's ripening at whatever time. But in general, the kinder you are and the stronger your morality is, the better reception you have from others. So you have more respect from others. People, care for you more. They make your situation easier. They have less obstacles. They create less obstacles, right? But if you're only focusing on that, then you're only focusing on this life, which is still a practice of morality, but it's a small practice of morality, right? It's not motivated by the bigger picture. So we have to try to balance those things. But sometimes that's useful when our practice especially feels like it's in a slump. If looking at future lives or the eventual Buddhahood we may realize isn't doing it for us for whatever reason at the moment, then you can say, okay, I can see worldly examples too of this benefiting in a worldly scenario. And sometimes that can help jumpstart, when needed. But that shouldn't be our ultimate reason. I think there's a question online. I see a hand.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Uh, I had a question around this practicing morality. Okay, I'll speak for myself. As girls, as women, we're really kind of conditioned to be nice and accommodate people, and it's sort of something that's taught to us right from childhood,
Mhm.
right? But so, we get into families being nice and kind and compassionate, but it doesn't always result in being that respect and kindness being
Mhm.
reciprocated. So I guess I'm just really asking a question on the patriarchal aspect of practicing morality as a woman,
Yeah.
because it's not really that straightforward. So I guess it brings me to that core question, that when is protecting yourself self-cherishing, and when do I exercise my wisdom? Because this line is very blurred for
Mm.
me, right? So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could shed some
Yeah, of
light.
course.
Yeah.
So I don't know, did everyone hear the question, more or less? So first of all, when we say practicing morality, the first thing we're talking about is practicing avoiding the 10 non-virtues, right? Abandoning the 10 non-virtues. So the non-virtues of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and then the non-virtues of lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, and idle chatter, and then the non-virtues of having a mind of malicious intent, and a mind of wrong views, and a mind of jealousy, right, or envy. So those are the 10 non-virtues. So primary, when we say practicing morality, is abandoning those. And that abandoning those is going to be the same regardless of your gender or gender identity, right? But as you're saying, due to the culture we're in, there is a patriarchal culture where women aren't treated the same as men, and that what's expected of women is different than men. So for women, in general, this isn't true everywhere all the time, but for a woman to assert their own independence is looked upon as them, being bitchy, essentially, right? What for a man is like a good example of him having self-respect. For a woman is looked upon as them being inappropriate. I appreciate that the societal standard is totally unfair. But that really shouldn't affect your practice of morality, right? Your practice of morality is about how you engage in virtue or non-virtue. Now, when you relate to society, you have to decide society's expectations of me aren't my practice of morality, first off, right? And so then, as you said, this line of when am I doing something that is only for my own self-cherishing, or when am I actually helping create positive conditions that allow me to practice more fully? Where is that line is difficult, unfortunately. And the truth is, it inquires introspection, and it inquires looking at your own mind, right? And so what I often say is whenever I'm experiencing like an overwhelming emotion to do something, right? I say, what is the benefit of this emotional experience? And why am I about to go about this? So, if without giving into specific examples, because I can't speak to what it's like to be a woman in contemporary 21st century society, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that if you know that a certain activity is going to, for instance, this is a very easy example, but let's say you're in an abusive relationship where there's some sort of spousal abuse, right? Or domestic violence. Then getting out of that environment isn't just because you want to be happy, but it's because you realize that as long as you're experiencing that kind of violence, emotional or physical violence, you don't have the capacity to practice to the fullest extent, right? It's an obstacle for you. So yes, you shouldn't develop anger towards your spouse because anger isn't going to be benefiting you, right? And you should recognize that they're suffering and that their actions are causing them more harm than you. Those are all true. Yet at the same time, they're engaging a violence towards you in that intimate relationship, intimate partner violence is something, if you can avoid it, you should. And so if you have the means, and not everyone has the means, unfortunately, to pull themselves out of those situations, but if you have the means and resources to, you recognize the reason I'm doing this isn't simply because I worry about my physical body in this life. Like that is the bare minimum. It's more that I worry about my ability to practice Dharma in a meaningful way, engage in a spiritual path. And right now, this circumstance is serving as a giant obstacle to that. So I'm not leaving out of anger or hatred, and I'm not leaving because I care so much about my physical body, but I'm leaving because I want to be able to practice virtue and I want to engage in a spiritual practice that is most meaningful. And I can't do that in this environment right now, right? So you look at your motivation, and the physical activity might be the exact same, right? The physical activity may be seeking out safety from that violence, right? Whatever that may look like, whether it be going to live with family or go to shelter or whatever it may be, whatever resource you have. That's the same, but your motivation has to be different. So that's the important part, is trying to make sure your motivation is so you can work to engage in spiritual practice in this life to benefit yourself and others. And with that as the motivation, then you have to see what conventional actions do I need to take to allow me to do that. But it isn't, unfortunately, there isn't like a clean line,
Yeah, but it
we see
helps.
examples of the Buddha in the past life where people actively cause harm to him and he embraces that harm because for whatever reason, it's benefiting the situation, right? Most of us can't do that. Most of us can't say, it's okay, I allow them to cause harm to me and it doesn't affect my mind because we haven't achieved that level of strength of our mind, right? So when people cause us harm, it's good to try to avoid that situation when possible. But it's always about, we need to look at our actions, our motivations.
Well, I'll add to her because all the activities that women do are, packaged by society in the name of compassion, right? You are looking after your child and you're cooking or something. These are not activities, they're packaged in such a way that you come out as a very generous and a compassionate person, right? So they're packaged in certain sense to brainwash a little bit of our minds. And then when we hear, teachings of compassion, it's adding to that. And that's why you always hear these questions: how much do I look for myself, and how much do I do? Because all these activities are, packaged in that way for us to keep giving more and more. And
So I think it's important when we look at what society demands of us, regardless of our gender or gender expression. And they say that if you don't do this, then you're not acting compassionately. If you don't do this, then you're not acting like the way a woman should because blah, 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 whatever it is. We say, is what society is saying, is that really compassion? Or are they just using that language and weaponizing that language in such a way to conform us into activities that aren't actually compassion, right? And so, in the Lojong teachings specifically, they say, if you're really engaged in deep spiritual practice and abandoning the self-cherishing mind, society will look upon you like a crazy person. To actually abandon the self-cherishing mind and engage in a practice of a spiritual path is so counterintuitive to the worldly person that it looks like the actions of a crazy person. And I don't mean like, the crazy tantric activities. I don't mean that. I just mean not focusing on myself, not saying everything is about my happiness and my well-being, and therefore I'm going to put others before myself. So we know that engaging in an actual spiritual practice that's motivated by compassion and altruism does not look like what society expects everyday people to live like, So when society uses or co-opts some of our language whether it be compassion or love or the responsibility of a parent, when they co-opt that language, we shouldn't allow their definitions or meanings to infiltrate our own understanding. But we also shouldn't reject it out of hand too. Even when our enemies criticize us, quote unquote enemies, it's worth listening to them and saying, is there any validity in what they say? What benefit can I take from this? One of the great qualities of a bodhisattva or a Buddha is that they say he's like the great swan, where if milk and water are mixed together, he could drink just the milk and leave behind the water, right? So no matter the difficulty of the circumstance, we can find some benefit in it. That's what we should aspire to be like. I know that example when I was in grad school. So my graduate degree is in a master's of divinity, right? Which is traditionally a Christian degree for Christians that don't have a seminary, right? That's how it's developed. And Harvard just happened to open it up to other religions as well, because they said, we're training you to be a minister. Anyone can be a minister. Being a minister is about using your own religious faith in order to service others. You don't have to be Christian. It's still a predominantly Christian program, right? Most of the students are Christian. And I remember going to an advisor, whose name is Charlie Halsey, who is great. I was just complaining about having to take all these Christian classes and whatever this nonsense was. And he was just like, you need to be like a swan. He cut me down to size. It's very funny. He was very academic. And he won't call himself a Buddhist, right? And his field of study is in Sri Lankan Buddhism. So Hinayana Buddhism and Sinhalese Buddhism. Yet he lives his life like a bodhisattva, like you wouldn't believe. And so he gives you the best advices. I'm complaining about everything. I'm just, woe is me, woe is me. And he's like, didn't the Buddha say you need to take the milk and leave behind the water? All you're doing is sucking up the water. He's like, leave it behind. That's not helping you. There's so much benefit. You're at Harvard of all places. There's huge benefit. Why are you looking at the negative? There's so much positive. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay. So it's important to recognize that, yes, I think society expectations, especially on women, but on many of us in general, are unfair, undue. And if we act in such a way that displeases them, then it can be feel disastrous. It's worth looking at that criticism and saying, is there any validity to it? And then acting. So not rejecting any criticism or any of that out of hand, but then actually analyzing it with our own wisdom mind and saying, where is this coming from? And then adopting behavior that is in line with our spiritual goals and not with social goals. And then, of course, finding that balance. Well, we still live in society, so I have to at least maybe exist in some way that allows me to live in society with as few obstacles as possible, right? Maybe that means not mouthing off to my boss when he's wrong. Maybe that means whatever these things are. And accepting that, well, accepting is the wrong word. Recognizing that is the nature of the world I live in right now. I can still push back against it in a way that's intelligent and wise, right? Yeah, go ahead.
To this, one example, we spoke about women being abused by husband. That is one example, being in a patriarchal.
Yeah.
But I've seen situations where we have toxic parenting, which has become very common now. So how do the children voice out, whether regardless of age? Because they are dharmaless, most of them. So how do you see where we can, self-cherishing is very important.
It's hard.
For a dharma practitioner, right?
Yeah.
What do you say?
Having respect to our parents and serving our parents is considered incredibly valuable activities, right? Never mind in the Indian context, but just in the Buddhist context, and even if our parents have been abusive to us in the past or are abusive to us, they still are looked upon as objects of virtue. So we should serve them and respect them and venerate them, right? And if you look at the 5 actions of immediate retribution, killing your father or killing your mother are equal to killing an arhat, a being who's been liberated from samsara. That's how heavy that action is, right? And obviously, we're not talking about killing them, but it shows that they're objects of, our parents are objects of great virtue or great non-virtue, depending on how we behave towards them. It's also true that there are many toxic parents we can have, right? I've experienced it. I'm sure many other people have. We have to find the balance of how can I. So, for instance, this is a good example. Many of you know that my mother passed away a couple of years ago, and the last year or so of her life, I took care of her. I went home from Sarah on different occasions and spent a little more than 3 months as her primary caregiver. She had cancer, and she had gone through surgery and was very physically debilitated. And then quickly, So the first time I went to visit her, I was taking care of her, and she was so mean because she was so unhappy that she was dying and that she had cancer. And her sister, my sister is a therapist, and I obviously am a Buddhist monk and I've done chaplaincy work. And that's like the area that we know how to deal with that. But our mother didn't want advice from us. So that wasn't our goal, right? So we had to be dutiful children and take care of her best we could. So I literally took care of every one of her needs for a few months. And she was so angry all the time. And I was the only one she could take it out on. Right. So she was awful to me. Like she treated me really, really awfully. And then her cancer spread to her brain and she just got loopy and crazy and was even worse. But on one hand, it was easier because you could tell this was pure sickness happening, right? It was just her cancer talking. But before that, she was in her right mind. But she was just so angry and so terrified of dying. She was so terrified of dying. She took it all out on me. And luckily, I had the practice and I've done enough work that I could realize she is suffering. All of this vitriol she's given me is because she doesn't want to suffer, because she's terrified of dying. She wants more time with her grandkids. She doesn't think she deserves this. And she doesn't. No one deserves to get sick, right? We just do. It's ripening of whatever karma, but it doesn't even deserve it, right?
But what about healthy parents who are very toxic?
No, I know. This is just an example, right? But so what I was able to do is recognize that by serving her in that way was very valuable to me, gave me an opportunity to practice patience. And I didn't allow myself to be upset by her harm or her vitriol because I realized it wasn't about me. It was about her own fear, her own, all of the things that were going on in her. And now, luckily, that was a situation where I didn't have a choice really besides helping her because she needed the care. And my brother and sister had full-time jobs and families. They couldn't do it. I had a break from the monastery and I had the means to do it. If you have healthy parents, then you couldn't just break off with them, right? You have that possibility. So your options are more. Like I didn't have as many options. I guess technically I did, but not really, In either case, what's important is to look at your own mind and to say, the way they're acting towards me has nothing to do with me, right? And if I am in a place where I can receive whatever vitriol they're giving or whatever harm they're giving, not let it affect my mind, and still offer service to them in some way, it's worthwhile to try to do that. It's definitely worthwhile. Because our parents, even if they've been difficult parents or toxic parents, which is much more common, I think, now than in the time of the Buddha, even if that's the case, they still they were still part of the conditions that allowed us to have a perfect human rebirth and have access to the Dharma, right? Even if it wasn't their intention, being born in this life due to those parents who raised us somehow participated in us becoming who we are, right? Excuse me. So with that in mind, if there's a way for us to receive whatever toxicity they're sending, but not let it affect our mind and still treat them with the respect they deserve and the veneration they deserve or that we can give them, it's worthwhile trying. Now, if we're not able to, if whatever toxicity they're giving is so heavy, then we have to say, what do I need to do to make this as to prevent myself from engaging in as non-virtuous as possible? So maybe limiting the amount of time you interact with them allows you to keep a more virtuous mind about them and allows you, when you do see them on occasion, to not be overwhelmed if you don't see them every day. And maybe some of us don't have a choice. You might have to live with your parents. Your parents might be elderly, and especially in the Indian culture, taking care of your parents is paramount, right? So maybe you don't have a choice. In that case, it really involves doing the inner work to say, I recognize where their toxicity is coming from. And it's not coming from me. It's coming from their worldly minds, their self-cherishing minds. And how can I go about engaging in a spiritual practice, allow their harm to me be part of my path of practice, be part of my recognizing this is the ripening of karma that I've created in the past. This experience of suffering I have is because I've created the causes to experience the suffering. So therefore, it's not coming from them, it's from my own actions. The words they may be saying, my experience of suffering comes from my mind, from actions I've created in the past, from negative karmic seeds I've planted. And therefore, recognizing that, it allows you to experience whatever harm they're giving, but not take it to heart. But every circumstance is going to be different, right? So it's a matter of evaluating your circumstances. And if this physical circumstances are overwhelming and you have a means to mediate them, then you should do that. And then maybe come back later and see if it's changed. I mean, my example, when I first moved to Sarah, I was living in a house with other Westerners, and there was a particular monk who was not very stable, and he made living there very difficult. Right? It was just very hard, and he never attacked me in any way. He's never physically attacked anyone, but he was verbally, like, he was just unstable, and he was very kind to me always, but he made life difficult because there was a sense of uncertainty all the time, right? And so, for my own, I said, I'm here trying to do everything in Tibetan, which is already hard, and I'm dedicating, like, full life to this kind of study, which is difficult, not what I'm used to. So I moved out of the house and I moved in with my teacher. I got the blessing alone was over me to do so at first, but that allowed me to focus and not have to worry about that. Now, if my mind was strong enough, it didn't matter those external circumstances. I should have been able to study without that, but it wasn't strong enough. So I said, this is an obstacle. It's creating an obstacle. And my goal here is to improve my mind and to engage in the study material, the study program at Sarah. And this is serving as an obstacle to them. So I lived with it for a year and finally said, I need to take the means to prevent that obstacle, And so we have to just be realistic sometimes and say, samsara is hard. Samsara is difficult. So we have to take whatever we have, whatever circumstances we have, and do the best we can. And sometimes that means making worldly changes, but it always should be focused on our spiritual path, right? So whenever I engage in whatever these worldly changes are, whether it means separating from my parents, I know people who, after the election of Trump, the first time, never mind the second time, have cut off all contact with their parents. And they say, I can't engage, like my parents voted for Trump. And they have such a MAGA mindset that all it is harm. Like all it is poison. And they've cut off communication with their parents because they just can't engage in a meaningful relationship because every communication breaks down into this toxic politics, right? So there are adults who no longer see their parents because they can't, right? They say, for my peace of mind and for their peace of mind, I can't engage in it. So sometimes you have to do that. But if you do that, you should always, what is my real motivation? My motivation isn't because I want my life to be easy. My motivation isn't because I want people to only give me compliments and not argue with me, right? My motivation is because I want to practice Dharma and I want to benefit other sentient beings. And right now, this is an obstacle that I can't overcome. Due to whatever resources I have now, I don't have enough resources to overcome this emotional obstacle. If that is your motivation, then it's okay, right? So that's the most important part. It's always checking, why am I doing this? How is this action benefiting me or harming me? Okay, we need to take a break because I think I'm going to be skinned alive by Sadhana over there, who desperately wants us to take a break. Yeah. So we have a birthday to celebrate. Madhvi, one of the center's primary. It's not my birthday. It's not my birthday.
It's also, yesterday was Venerable Raptan.
Okay, so we'll take a 15-minute break. For those of us online, I hope you can come back and join us. But we are celebrating Madhvi, who's one of the primary volunteers here at the center. It's her birthday today. Raptan Lao, who was one of the teachers emeritus, one of the former teachers who used to teach here quite often, who's now back in Singapore. His birthday was yesterday. My birthday is next Saturday, and we're going to be teaching online next weekend, which is why they want to celebrate it today. And fine, I guess that's the way it is. Also, Lama Yeshe, the anniversary of Lama Yeshe's passing away is on Losar. That's coming up in a few days. So all of those are an occasion to celebrate with some tea, some coffee. So please, those of us online, take a 15-minute break, get yourself some refreshments, celebrate these many birthdays. Stretch your legs if you have to, but we'll be back here. My clock says 11:45, so we'll be back right at noon. Okay, so 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. 5-minute warning, friends, online as well. 5 minutes.
Venerable, we can't hear you.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just answering a side question and it's in Tibetan, so
Okay,
no problem.
okay. Sorry.
It's okay. 2-minute warning though.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, friends, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope we enjoyed our refreshments. Thank you for the kind birthday celebrations. Congratulations, Madhvi, for making it around the sun one more time, right? We've done it. You know what? I mean, we joke, but it's hard. It's hard, that we're here, we're doing our best. We still have a good outlook. We're trying to engage in meaningful practice is difficult, Tibetan culture, actually, everyone celebrates their birthday on Losar. No matter when you're born, your birthday is celebrated on Losar, right? So when you're born, usually they recognize you as 0. You're not 1. And then at Losar, you turn 1, right?
Even though it might be 15 days.
Yeah, exactly. It could be 2 days or it could be 300 days. Everyone turns 1 on Losar. And so Losar is like celebrated as a birthday, which is why if you go to the monastery, and most Tibetans you speak to, you can ask them the year they were born and they'll know the animal, right? Because the Tibetan years all have a different animal. So they could tell you that. But other than that, they often don't know. So you look at like our Aadhaar cards of all, because I have to do a lot of the booking for travel for my housemates. And they're all just like on January 1st or March 1st. They just pick a random month and they put a date down because they need something for their paperwork. But it's quite often, these days, it's a little different. But a lot of it's just, they choose a random date and put it down, because it's not as important. Because Losar is the day they're supposed to, they celebrate their birthday. So what I wanted to continue with today is that the remaining of these verses, I want to actually have time for meditation today. It's already 12. So I'm not going to go into too much more on these verses. We can discuss them a little bit next week, some more. But I just wanted to show that in the Lamrim, right, we start with perfect human rebirth as the first meditation, and then we go to death and impermanence. And here it's the same. So verse 15 is giving us the abbreviated version or teaching of perfect human rebirth, right? If the arising of the Tathagata and faith and the attainment of a human body and my being fit to cultivate virtue, they're also scarce. When will they be won again? It's showing how difficult it is. Then verse 16 is the one verse talking about death and impermanence, right? Today I'm healthy, I'm well nourished, I'm unafflicted. But life is momentary and deceptive, and this body is an object on loan for about a minute. And then the rest of the verses we discussed today are all about perfect human rebirth, right? So briefly, I wanted to talk about death and impermanence and the importance of meditating on it at the beginning of the path. And we'll do more about the perfect human rebirth next week, because I'd like to at least have a discussion of all of the 8 and the 10 aspects of a perfect human rebirth. We don't have time for that today.
Venerable.
Yes.
In the verse 15, can I ask you a question? What is arising of the Tathagata means that we are living in a time of the Dharma? Is that?
Exactly. So if we look at the 10 endowments, right, that come with a perfect human rebirth, one of them is being born at a time when there is a Buddha, and then that Buddha is giving teachings, and then there are people that are following those teachings and people that are sharing those teachings, right, students. So that's what it means. Being born at a time when the Tathagata exists and gives teachings is so rare, right? So that's what that's referencing in verse 15. So thinking about death and impermanence, for me, and we won't spend a lot of time on it today, because I do want to do a proper meditation. Whenever I give introductory, like a 10-day class or something, and we always start with death and impermanence, I love starting with death and impermanence because we are taught to be so afraid of our own mortality. And due to our fear of it, we don't think about it. And since we don't think about it, then that just makes it more scary, right? And the truth is, when you realize, so we say there are generally 3 realizations when we think about death and impermanence. The first is that death is definite or certain. There's no escaping death, right? And the second, which is almost the more important one and the more difficult one, is that the time of death is uncertain. And then the last one is that nothing will benefit us at the time of our death except for our spiritual practice, or except for the Dharma, right? And if you look at the very common 9-round meditation, each of those has 3 points that you can meditate on, right? We all can intellectually understand that death is certain. And that one isn't that hard to have an emotional realization of too. We see our bodies getting older, we see our experience of aging and sickness, and it brings us close to the realization that, okay, we're not going to live forever. The second one, the time of death is uncertain. That's so hard to actually believe, It's easy to understand intellectually. Of course, we know that. but to actually have a realization that there's no guarantee that all of us together are going to wake up tomorrow morning. We're all relatively healthy and, taking care of ourselves. There's no guarantee. None at all. It's easy to say that intellectually. It's really hard to develop conviction in that. But when you do, then it makes all of your activities that much more powerful. Because you say, why am I wasting my time? Why am I wasting my time with whatever these silly things are? There's no guarantee that I'll be alive tomorrow morning. But I'm alive now and I have the capacity to do something, to engage in spiritual practice, to help out someone, whether it be worldly benefit or spiritual benefit, right? So why would I waste this moment? And of course, we're sitting here together studying. So the idea is like benefiting doesn't always mean going out and doing these big things. It means working on our mind, right? We're aligning our mind towards Buddhahood, whatever practice that may be. So for right now, it means we're studying together, meditating together. In your everyday life, it may mean something else, depending on your circumstances. You still have to go to work, right? The awareness that you might die at any moment doesn't mean you can't work. For those of you that have responsibilities and have to take care of a house and a family, right? Unfortunately, it would be nice if having a realization could get rid of that, but it can't, right? You have worldly responsibilities you've committed to. But then you say, okay, I have to do these things. How can I do them in such a way that they're always encouraging practices of virtue, that they're always in line with and participating in my spiritual journey, and not just a worldly practice that I'm doing to get by? Because there's no guarantee that I'm going to have tomorrow to do practice. And then that combines with the last point, that when I die, nothing is going to benefit me except for my Dharma practice. They say no matter how much wealth I have, that's not going to benefit me. My family and friends aren't going to benefit me, no matter how much they want to. All that's going to benefit me is my mind and how calm of mind I have and how much virtue I've accumulated. They often say, actually, having loved ones around you at the time of death is deleterious, they say. If you're lying on your deathbed and you have your family and friends around you crying and wailing and showing distress, it's very hard for you to keep a calm mind, right? Your mind is attracted to that distress, to that anxiety that your family are experiencing. And as a result of that, the mind at the moment of death, we say, is very, very important. Whichever karmic seed we planted that ripens into our future life is activated by the mind we have at the moment of death. So if our mind at the moment of death is incredibly disturbed, then the likelihood of it activating a negative karmic seed or a less than great karmic seed is higher, right? So we want to have, and to some extent, we practice so we can have a peaceful death. Like that is, in some ways, the culmination of our practice of this very life is to have a death that's peaceful. And peaceful doesn't mean our body is peaceful, because we have no control over that. We might have illness, we may have all these things, but that our mind can be peaceful regardless of what's going on. So sometimes they say having family around you can be harmful to the death process, right? But what I take that from my side is, and at my work doing hospice care and my work with other people who are going through the dying process, is to then try to create the environment where regardless of what's going on with their bodies, they can have a peaceful mind and a calm mind. And even if they aren't Buddhists, like most of the hospice work I've done hasn't been with Buddhists. It's with people that are just interested in spiritual leaders giving them hospice care. It wasn't specifically Buddhist hospice care. So I said, what can I offer you at the time of your death, at the time of you being sick, that will allow you to be participating in this process fully, not avoiding it, not developing negative minds, but be peaceful, right? That's what's most important. So if we can give that to others, it's really powerful. But it is, they say, family and friends don't help you at the time of your death. They often hurt.
But
Yeah.
I know of people who have died during COVID, and like it was terrible here, and so their families were not able to get to them, and they have like a friend of mine, she lost her husband, and she said he was so distraught. She wasn't there, but she spoke to him, I think, before and he was so distraught because he was leaving them, and he hadn't seen them for a week or 10 days or something like that. So it could, I suppose, go.
I mean, it's our attachment to our family and friends that is causing us distress, right? So what this teaching is pointing out that I'm mentioning is that when you have people surrounding your bedside who are wailing and gnashing their teeth and saying, why is this happening? That's not beneficial. But if they're around your bedside saying, we love you, we're here for you, we support you, then that can be beneficial, right? And so his experience was not just at the moment of death, but also preceding it. He was separated from his loved ones, and separated not by choice, but due to the difficulties of the environment, right? And the medical requirements. So that exacerbated his feeling of longing and attachment and these things, right? And so you can see And now I'm not criticizing your friend or her husband, but you can see how him grasping made his death that much more painful for him and painful for his family, right? Which isn't to say that we should not care about our family and friends, but if we grasp at them as being our source of happiness, then when we're separated from them, it makes our unhappiness even stronger, right? So we have to try to develop a mind that can have love and compassion for those we care about intimately, that isn't dependent on their presence to have that satisfied mind. And it's not easy to do. It's very difficult, you know. Yeah, I was, speaking of caring for my mother, I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but her last couple days alive, she slept for like the last 4 days of her life. And she was still in pain. When I washed her and everything, like she'd react and she was in pain, but for the most part, she was asleep. And we gave her pain meds because she wanted pain meds to alleviate as much as possible. But so I was able to play Lama Zopa Rinpoche reciting sutras and other holy texts. So at least, my mother wasn't Buddhist, but she could hear auspicious sounds. And, that doesn't do a lot, but it helps a little bit and it helps align yourself. And we were lucky that all of our family was able to at least see her. And I don't know how much she was aware of. It's very unclear, right, in her state. But at least people were able to spend time with her, to share their love with her, and then not create a more difficult circumstance than it had to be. The difficulty of her illness was something we could control, but we could try to mediate the circumstance. So I was very fortunate in that regard. And then I was able to have some sort of closure and create an environment where she could die in something that looked like peace, right, regardless of what it was or was not. Not everyone gets that. We can't expect that, unfortunately. So we have to build up the resources, the inner resources, to not depend upon that, so that when we experience the death process, which could happen any moment, that we aren't dependent on others to make that easy for us, And so the reason we study death and impermanence first isn't because we want to be depressed and isn't because we want everyone to be gloomy all the time. It's to really show that practice is important and there's no reason to wait our practice. There's no reason to delay. That our ability to practice can be taken from us at any moment. So therefore, we should be motivated. We should use the recognition that my life is fragile, like a water bubble. It could pop at any moment. That shouldn't depress me. Instead, it should motivate me. It should excite me and say, but it's not popped yet. I have the chance to practice right now. I have the chance to do something, make my life meaningful. And I do that by developing compassion and wisdom. That's how I make my life meaningful. I dedicate it to others. In whatever way I have, using whatever privileges and resources and abilities I have, that is how I make my life meaningful. Right?
You mentioned about the condolences to your mom. That's the worldly people. We create that environment. Because when I visited some of the stupas in Leh, Ladakh, I saw from my own eyes, they were the monks who chose their death time and they left. They showed me that also through the crown chakra.
Yeah.
So could you please add light on they choose the time? How is that?
So when you have a high level of realization, and not even realization, but strong meditation practice, you can often tell when the end of your life is coming, right? And for those who especially practice in what's called POA, which is a type of meditation practice, then they can they choose their death insofar as their body is failing them. They don't cause their body to fail or not fail, but they recognize it's happening. So then they, instead of fighting it, they recognize when it's going to happen and they give themselves the best condition and the best environment so it can happen in a way at a time that is intentional and not accidental. But it has to do with just having a strong meditation practice and having a mind that is powerful enough to recognize that my life force isn't going to be continuing. And POA practice we can all do. It's not as common. It's not as commonly taught, but it comes from, well, there are a couple different sources of it. One of the main sources is from Naropa. We call the 6 yogas of Naropa. The 6, meditative practices of Naropa. One of them is POA. In the Nyingmapa tradition, it's practiced quite a lot. It's called transference of mind. This POA means to send forth. And there's a meditative practice. It comes from Tantra, but you visualize your mind in a certain way, and you visualize your subtle body, so the central channel, and you visualize your mind in it, and you visualize your mind exiting the central channel, where it connects here. Usually we say our central channel, we visualize it connecting, ending, terminating here, but in this meditation, you visualize it terminating here instead, and you visualize your mind like a ball of light being shot like an arrow. And you actually do this visualization. And I only have I've been given instruction in it, but my experience is very limited. I know at the Nyingmapa temple near us in Balakupe, they do retreats on POA. And the way you test if your meditation has been successful is they take a piece of grass and to see if it can stick. If you've softened your skull a little bit through your meditation, and they'll take a piece of grass and stick it here. And if it sticks up, it means you've made some progress in the path. And so sometimes you'll go to town and you see a bunch of the nuns walking with a piece of grass sticking out of their head.
You mean it's just there?
It's that they say that if you practice enough, you've actually softened, because your mind is what's leaving your body, right? Your mind and the body are separate. So you're sending the mind off, and by doing it, you are sending through the highest part of your body. You're kind of ensuring a positive rebirth in that way, right? But so by doing that, they repeatedly, you picture your mind like a battering ram hitting the top of your crown chakra. It's softened. They say you can soften the skull. And they actually say you don't practice POA too much. That there's a point where you practice it enough. That you don't practice it too much because it can end your life short. You can abbreviate your life because you've gotten too good at it, basically. So you practice it to a certain extent, and then when you come close to the time when you know your life force is being exhausted, then they sit in strong meditation like that. But that's not something everyone can do, unfortunately. But it's a practice. It's a practice anyone can try, but it takes actual meditative, engagement. It's not something you can just do overnight. You have to have skill at it. But so that's what that is.
Take the Tsumo practice.
So Tsomo is inner heat, right? So where that is really coming in is we see Tsomo especially taught in Mother Tantras, where you are generating inner heat and you're allowing that inner heat to cause the Bodhisattva drops to descend and generate the 4 joys of highest yoga tantra. So that is like a special practice. However, some of the visualizations are the same because you're visualizing the subtle body, which is made up of the chakra, the central channel, and then the different chakras, which are places where the left and right channels wrap around the central channel to create a knot. So you aren't able, part of POA is helping loosen those chakra knots. That's part of Tantra practice as well, is we recognize that we want our subtle winds and subtle minds to flow without any obstructions through our subtle channel. And the chakras are places where there are obstructions because the left and right channels have wrapped around the central channel. So what inner heat meditation does is, again, focused at the point in the navel, where you're meditating in such a way to generate an inner fire that causes, like I said, bodhicitta drops to descend without any obstacles, and then you experience joy. But it comes from the highest yoga tantra and the mother lineage. But the visualization, some of them start the same, and you visualize the channels the same way. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to. Okay, we'll end there. Do we have any other questions? I was going to do a meditation on bodhicitta, but we only have 10 minutes. So if there are other questions or questions online, we can take those.
Venerable.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about self-cherishing attitude. So I was reading through dependent origination, where we are saying the self-grasping ignorance is the root, where it starts the 12 links. So in case of an arhat who has directly realized emptiness, they have completely eliminated self-grasping ignorance, right?
Correct.
So they know that self, me, and all phenomena are empty of objective existence. But in arhats also, as in the Shravaka system, they still have self-cherishing, right? Because they have cognitive obscuration. So in spite of seeing that self is empty of, what are they grasping at? Are they grasping at an imputed self?
Yeah. So we say that arhats don't have self-cherishing. So an arhat has not only eliminated self-grasping, they've eliminated all of the afflictive minds, as well as all the seeds of the afflictive minds. And so self-cherishing is an afflictive mind. The cognitive obscurations that an arhat, someone who has achieved liberation from samsara, has achieved moksha, the cognitive obscurations they haven't eliminated, that manifests as 2 things. Those are the imprints from the afflictions, and they manifest, for instance, the imprints of ignorance manifest as dualistic appearance. So they don't grasp on to dualistic appearance, but it still appears to them, right? And there are other examples, like the imprints of desire and the imprints of anger, can also manifest as then the example we get when we study it is like there's a monk or an arhat who when he's reborn he like barks like a monkey or something like this due to him having like that's the imprint of anger in the past life. That his like the way he acts in the world, like he can't control his body, but it's a nenlin. It's like a negative circumstance that he's experiencing. That's the imprint ripening. That's an actual cognitive obscuration. So it's small things like that, right? It's not affecting his mind, but like the way he persists in the world. So a arhat, someone that has totally eliminated the afflicted minds, will have eliminated self-cherishing, as well as the seeds of self-cherishing, right? However, and this is something that comes up when you read commentaries, for instance, on the Lodlam text we're studying last night. If someone who is an arhat then enters into the Mahayana path, then they've eliminated self-cherishing. So what is the purpose of them practicing Lodlam, mind training? Because they've already eliminated self-cherishing. And we say that even though an arhat has eliminated self-cherishing, due to the imprints of self-cherishing, they still have karmic seeds and imprints from acts of self-cherishing in the past. Those karmic imprints are cognitive obscurations that can still manifest in their life by causing some sort of attachment in one direction or another. It's not quite the level of an afflictive mind, right? But it is the ripening of a karmic imprint that came about from them practicing self-cherishing previously, before they achieved the state of being an arhat. But they don't have an active, manifest self-cherishing mind. That would not be possible. The actual mind of self-cherishing being manifest in their continuum is something they've eliminated. Right? They've eliminated all of the afflictive minds when they achieved either if you are on the Shravaka or the Pratyeka Buddha path, when you achieve the arhathood, the arhathood, I suppose you'd say in English, or when you achieve moksha, the hinayana moksha, you eliminate it, or if you're on the Mahayana path, when you achieve the eighth ground, the eighth Bodhisattva Bhumi, you also eliminate all of the afflictive obscurations and their seeds. So anyone who's either achieved the eighth Bhumi or have achieved moksha, then they will not have any manifest self-cherishing in their mind, but they still have the imprints from before. And those imprints can still affect the way they exist in the world and their experiences. Not nearly as strongly as they would affect us, right? Obviously, but they're still there.
So there's a connecting second question, Venerable. So I think sometime back, 2 weeks back, you'd mentioned Dharma Rakshita, who follows a tenet system of Vaibhashika but still gave bodhicitta to Atisha.
Mm-hmm.
So I always feel this contradiction when I read that, if you're following a tenet system which says, which talks about emptiness, or, it talks about being a substantial permanent self, and then you can still teach bodhicitta, which really comes from largely prasangika, which is empty of objective existence. So how can you follow a tenet system and follow something which is completely contradictory?
Right, so we say that the idea of bodhicitta isn't uncommon to the prasangika system. And in fact, there are bodhisattvas who are Vaibhashika bodhisattvas and Chittamatra bodhisattvas. We have examples of them. Now, the truth is, once you enter into the Mahayana path, you do have to have a realization of emptiness very shortly thereafter, right? So they will not progress very far on the Mahayana path without having a realization of emptiness. And the realization of emptiness can only come if you study in the prasangika view, or you understand the prasangika view. The prasangika, sorry, this is getting into very philosophical territory. The prasangika definition of selflessness is the highest definition. So every other school, including the other Madhyamakas, the Swatartrika Madhyamakas, their definition of selflessness isn't quite accurate. So if you're following their definition, you won't actually realize selflessness or emptiness. However, bodhicitta is so powerful, right, as a conceptual mind, that you can achieve bodhicitta, and achieving actual bodhicitta is what propels you onto the Mahayana path. That is the gateway, right? So there are Vaibhashikas who are bodhisattvas, and there are Chittamatrans who are bodhisattvas. But if we talk about the Mahayana path, they don't progress very far on it, because you have to have an actual realization of emptiness on that first, on the karasana, the path of accumulation. You have to have a realization. Because the distinction between the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, and this is a little bit higher level teaching, not for beginners, but I know you've studied this. The distinction where you move from the path of accumulation to preparation is when you have vipassana, so special insight that is focused on emptiness. That is where you progress from the path of accumulation to the path of preparation. Before you have a mind of special insight focused on emptiness, you have to have a conceptual understanding of emptiness, right? You don't start with special insight. You build up to special insight. First, you have to have a conceptual understanding of emptiness. And then that conceptual understanding is focused on with shine, shamatha, like single-pointed concentration. Then that single-pointed concentration, as it deepens, combines with wisdom to become special insight, right? So on the path of accumulation, you have to realize emptiness eventually. But it is possible to achieve bodhicitta without realizing emptiness. That's how powerful bodhicitta is. Because the point of bodhicitta isn't about understanding the nature of reality. It's about understanding that others' happiness is more important than yourself and committing yourself to become a Buddha for others' benefit. That's what bodhicitta is, right? Now, we'd
But
say
I
you
always
can't
thought
develop bodhicitta.
venerable, sorry. I
So you
always
can't
thought
develop
that
bodhicitta.
bodhicitta, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I always thought that bodhicitta was actually the ground for achieving bodhicitta is realizing emptiness, because the true great compassion will arise only when you realize emptiness of objective existence of self and others. So that duality will end at when you realize wisdom, and only then the great compassion of bodhicitta will arise.
So anyone that it is true that one of the precursors to bodhicitta is great compassion, not mere compassion, but great compassion. And great compassion doesn't exist in the mind of a Hinayana practitioner. That's true. But you can be someone who has engaged in Hinayana practice, who follows Hinayana views, and still develop great compassion. You get into very fine detail, very specifics here. But we see there's different types of students. Some students who are they describe them as sharp students and dull students. So a sharp student first develops realization of emptiness, and then based on that, they develop great compassion, and based on that, they develop bodhicitta. But there are other students who develop bodhicitta first, and they're the dull students who develop bodhicitta before they develop realization of emptiness. I think dull is still kind of a strange way to describe someone who's developed bodhicitta, but that is the language they use, right? So both are possible. And when you study Madhyamaka, if you study the Madhyamaka Avatara or Tsongkhapa's commentary, Gompa Rapso, illuminating the intent, then it talks about how, depending on the student, how first you can study, you look at Madhyamaka Avatara, right, which is the main text we study when we study emptiness. It starts by prostrating to great compassion. That's the prostration in that text. We spend months just debating that prostration. I prostrate to great compassion. And not Avalokiteshvara, who is the embodiment of great compassion, but actually I prostrate to great compassion. So why does a text on emptiness, on wisdom, prostrate to great compassion? And so there's a whole extensive explanation of how you develop compassion first, then bodhicitta, and then wisdom, or wisdom first, and then this, and so forth. And there's different students have, due to your personal proclivities, then one path is different than the other. But you're right, it is uncommon. It is uncommon for someone that holds non-prasangika tenet systems, such as Dharmarachita, to actually develop bodhicitta. So that's why we say Dharmarachita is uncommon, in that his philosophical view was a Hinayana system, but his sense of bodhicitta was so profound that it existed outside of the tenet systems, right? He didn't need to be taught it from a tenet system because his internal understanding of it was already there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes, please. Sendang. Oh, we said no. So she asked if mind and wind, right, are the same. Yeah, so in the tantric system, we said the very subtle mind and the very subtle wind are inseparable, right? So in that way, mind and wind are inseparable at the very subtle levels, but at the coarser levels, there's a distinction in that way. So they're not the same. But when you're meditating, especially that tantric meditation, you're meditating on both. The mind is what realizes things, and the wind, the very subtle wind, is what allows that mind to achieve, to have contact with any object, right? So part of the reason we say like a Buddha's mind is omniscient, right? A Buddha understands all phenomena simultaneously. That's what it means to have an omniscient mind. The reason every single mind that exists in a Buddha is omniscient. Even the Buddha's eye sense consciousness can perceive tactile sensations, let's say, because it can perceive all phenomena. Because of the very subtle wind allows that mind to reach any object that it wants. So the wind is what propels the mind to actually come into contact with an object, and then the mind is what then understands that object. So they go together like that. Yeah. In our meditation practice, so she's saying when meditating, we often see them as parallel because for our meditation practice, that's helpful, right? So this is again a skillful means. So in our meditation, we add our mind to our breath and we see them as indistinguishable, or we can, and that at our level of practice, that makes our meditation more profound and it gives us something to grasp onto. You look at a lot of meditations that are focusing just on meditating on the mind, and you meditate on the mind as if it were an empty sky that has no clouds. What does that mean? How that's hard to grasp onto, right? So using something like the breath and applying mind and the breath together, for someone like me whose meditation skills are so limited, it gives me something like an object. But then the more you meditate, then there's more fine distinctions. Do you know what I mean? But right now, that's a very useful, skillful means. Yeah. And to be fair, we can see, we say that the body and the mind, whether I don't mean the subtle mind even, but just the mind and the body in general, are like a horse and a rider, right? So they're inseparable in our lives. So when the horse, when the body, which is the horse, gets sick, then the rider can't go, right? But if the rider isn't doing well, then the horse doesn't travel. So they work together. And so the point I'm saying is that we can see in our experience, if I have a very upset mind, I can feel it in my body, right? If I am like very emotionally distraught, I get distressed, my breathing gets labored, and we also there are many techniques now where you regulate your body, it helps calm your mind. Like when you are like panting and out of control, if you can calm your body down, your mind follows naturally, quite often, right? So we see a different relationship between body and mind. And knowing that in our meditation, we can use that relationship to help develop stronger levels of meditation. Yeah. But ultimately they are separate. Like in the very ultimate detail, they're separate. Yeah.
But you just said you have like very limited experience when it comes to skills, when it comes to meditation. Why is that? It's a general question.
I've been practicing the Buddha Dharma in this life for a little over 2 decades. And I do my best, but there's a lot to learn, a lot to practice. I say I have very limited experience. No matter, I can see a dramatic change in my life from when I started practicing to now. There's no doubt about it. Both in my emotional life, my mental life, the way I treat others, all the way I experience the world around me. Yet I also know, because I've had that little experience, that I still have a long way to go, right? And then I know sometimes I'm not practicing as hard as I can. And I look at people who I see their meditative abilities, and I say, oh, I don't have that yet, so I have to keep practicing. So it's more, for me, it's important to stay humble and realize that even though I have some realization, my life is infinitely better now that I've practiced the Dharma than it was before. So I'm not saying that the Dharma doesn't matter, but I'm just recognizing that I'm trying to practice a type of humility that recognizes that whatever realizations whatever understanding I have accomplished is very small in the big picture, And the reason that's useful for me, here's a good example. If you're just trying to tame your mind and you're doing mindfulness meditation, so you're trying to cultivate what we call shine or shamatha. So you're just focusing on your breath, right? Let's say, and whenever you have a distraction, you recognize that distraction, let it go. As you engage in that practice and you meditate, let's say every day for 20 minutes, that's it. Eventually, you have fewer and fewer distractions, and you can maintain focus on your object of meditation, whether it be your breath or an image of the Buddha, for longer and longer periods of time, right? So you feel like I'm making progress, like my meditation is getting stronger. Then all of a sudden, you're going to hit a point where it feels like there's more distractions than ever before. Like you feel like you're overwhelmed with distractions. And you say, what's going on? I thought I've been working for however long. And usually what we say is the truth is those distractions were always there, but they were just so subtle that you didn't even realize those distractions were running around in your mind because they weren't the coarse distractions, they're more subtle distractions. So until you've actually developed a mind that is able to have a sense of stability, you aren't even aware of those subtle distractions, right? It's only by actually practicing that all of a sudden you can realize how distracted you were. So to some extent, my practice is like that, where I've definitely improved my meditative practice and my wisdom or my understanding. But the more I study and the more I practice, the more I realize how much I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
So you're saying that as I excel in my meditative practice day by day, I become more sensitive to the more subtle challenges.
Yes.
Initially, I didn't know that. That's what
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. But often it comes like a rush.
Yeah, like Maras, a lot of Maras in between your practice.
It can
I
be, yeah,
feel
but it's not like you realize it every day. Sometimes you feel like you're going up, 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 and then they come out of nowhere, it feels like.
I've experienced that as the spiritual goes up, your own family tries to, I didn't know that, but they come on your spiritual path.
You see, there are a lot of obstacles,
Yeah.
and a lot of time those obstacles were always there, like I said, but you don't realize it. You know what I mean? Like, you can think of your friends. We were talking yesterday about bad friends or friends that are encouraging you to engage in non-virtue, right? The friends may be saying, hey, after work, let's go out for a drink. Let's go to the bar. Let's get a drink, all these things. They'd be giving the same advice over and over again. But until you develop a spiritual practice where you realize that that's actually deleterious, you don't recognize it as bad advice. So it's only through your practice and your own spiritual development that the same thing they were doing, they don't change. The external may not change, but all of a sudden, what wasn't an obstacle before is now an obstacle. And the reason is because before you were happy to follow samsara, and now you don't want to follow samsara.
So
right?
we release from that, right? We need to detach from that.
We have to try to.
Yes.
Yeah. And that can look different ways depending on our life circumstances. It can just be an emotional detachment or maybe physical detachment or a combination thereof, right? But the truth is, the more we practice, we are going to experience new types of obstacles, right? That's an unfortunate truth, but it's also an opportunity for us to realize that there's some success happening in our practice, that we are uncovering obstacles that we weren't even aware of before. So we can use it as an opportunity to celebrate our practice, but also not let it make us feel defeated, right? And the truth is, even though there are more obstacles, you have more resources to deal with them, right? And even with the obstacles, they don't upset your mind as greatly, usually, the more you practice. You still experience them, but you already have created a practice that doesn't let them strike you right to the heart. It's like a glancing blow instead of a direct blow. That makes sense. So you still feel it, but it's not like you're overwhelmed by it. It would be really nice if once you started practicing, it was like smooth sailing and easy all the way. But unfortunately, it isn't. Buddhism can't promise that. I wish it could. It'd make it much more appealing to people if I could promise you those things. I will say sometimes, oh wow, we're going late. There's one other story some of you already know this story, but when I was living in Boston, I was working as the SBC at a FPMT center there. And I was living at the center after I graduated for about a year before I moved to India and ordained. And the director or the former director of that center is a friend of mine. And there was some point where there was like a big FPMT gathering or something. And he was one of Lama Yeshe's first students from the 70s. So he's an old timer. He has all the connections that go everywhere. And I'm, at this point, I was kind of like moving up within the echelon of this organization. And there were going to be all these kind of important people. And I just expected him to like introduce me to them and talk me up and do all these things. Because that's what I would have done. Like that made sense to me. I didn't tell him I expected him to do this. I just assumed he was going to do it. And then he didn't do it. And I took it very personally. And I was really hurt. And I remember being in the basement and which is my room was. I was in my room. And you know how like sometimes you're so angry and hurt at the same time, like you can't say anything. You just have like tears coming down your face and you can't control it. That's where I was so upset with him. And then I had a moment where I realized, wait a second. This is all from me. Like I never even asked him to do this. I just made an assumption that he was going to do this thing. He wasn't being malicious. He wasn't doing anything to harm me. He was just acting like he always acts. But I created an unrealistic set of expectations that I didn't even tell him about. And then when he failed to live up to those, I'm feeling this experience of suffering, which means this experience of suffering has 100% my own creation. It doesn't come from him. However, realizing that at that moment didn't actually help me. Not in that moment. Because then it was like, God, this is your fault. You know what I mean? And so it made it almost harder in that moment because it didn't get rid of my suffering right away. It just made me realize that I had no one else to blame but myself. However, afterwards, when I was able to like get out of that immediate sense of suffering, then it was helpful, right? But in the moment, it can sometimes feel even more painful because you're like, I should know better. I should know better. This is my own fault. So that realization sometimes can be a little sharp, right? But then you get past the moment of distress, you can reflect on it, and then that's a way to grow, right? So it doesn't always feel pleasant, unfortunately. Sometimes it can feel a little sharp, but that's what it means. We've lived our life seeking out the pleasures of samsara and telling ourselves that all these things the world says are happiness, we seek them out as if they're going to make our lives better. So turning away from them isn't easy. It's going to be difficult because we've created so many habits and so many, habitual minds and attitudes and behaviors that turning away from them, even if we understand logically that they're not helping us, it's hard to break habits, right? So, yeah, this didn't go the direction I thought it was going to be. I don't want to end you with that kind of gloominess, but I will say that as you practice, yes, you experience more obstacles, and sometimes those obstacles can come in the form of like the sharp recognition, like realizing this really is like my own doing, right? And in the moment, that may feel harsh, but all of them are leading us towards the capacity to overcome them in a more meaningful way, right? All of them are encouraging our growth and our ability to then not meet those same obstacles in the future. Right? So even though there's momentary sense of distress, it's all helping us move towards Buddhahood. And the primary fuel pushing us on that path is focusing on the benefit of others, relocating ourselves from the center of the story that we're telling, having our main focus be on others' happiness. That not only benefits them directly, and it makes it harder for us to focus on our own unhappiness because our attention is on others. And I know that it's hard, but we can start with focusing on the people that are already in our life, like our family, our friends, our children, because a lot of us have natural inclination to want them not to suffer and want them to be happy. And then once we are comfortable focusing their happiness, then we can expand it to other people as well, So that's why when we do the meditation, we develop equanimity. We start with developing compassion towards people we're close to, and then people that we're indifferent towards, and then people who may be harmful to us. Slowly, we don't expect 100% all the time right away. We build up our practice so it gets stronger and stronger every day, keeping our eye on the big picture, which is Buddhahood, but then recognizing that there's a whole path to journey to get there. So as long as I'm facing in the right direction, that's the best I can do. I'm not going to become a Buddha tomorrow, but if I can take one step in that direction, then I've succeeded. Okay, let's end it there because I've gone very long. Let's dedicate our merit so we recognize that our practice today together has generated some positive karma, which we call merit. And we can develop the wish for that merit, instead of it ripening just on ourselves alone, we wish that it could ripen on others, that the suffering of others would be alleviated through our merit ripening on them. That those, we can especially dedicate, I will say, to Omar Karan, who is a student of the FPMT, who is ill. He's in Hyderabad right now. He has had numerous surgeries this year, and his most recent one has left him with a very invasive infection. So he's currently on a ventilator, and it's not looking great, so I've been told, and we've been requested to pray for him. But we will especially pray for him and also for anyone who has requested our prayers, as well as all those who don't have any to pray for them. May any merit we've accumulated especially ripen upon them, that they might be free of all of their distress and all their suffering, that they may be free especially of all of their mental suffering. We dedicate all those who are practicing a spiritual path might achieve progress and realization in the spiritual path, and all of their wishes may be fulfilled in accordance with the Dharma. And we especially dedicate that we ourselves may quickly become Buddhas. We might actualize the perfect realization of Buddhahood so that we might be able to benefit others more completely. May our merit ripen in our own successful achievement of Buddhahood for the benefit of others. And with that, we will offer dedication prayers on page 36 of the Gold Book. So we'll offer the first two prayers in English, then we'll do that second verse we'll repeat in Tibetan once, and then we'll do the long life prayer for His Holiness in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of Bodhisattva that is not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Choe Khor Sum Ling, Ma Kye Panang Kye Gyoche, Kye Wan Yam Pa Me Pa Yang, Gone Gone Pe Wa Rizho. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. We will be continuing next week It'll be online next week.